So again, my name is Jesse Day, and I want to thank Melinda Ford, our GIS manager, for helping to put some of this information together. Also, Tony Jarrett from Allen Tate provided some real estate data from MLS. So I want to recognize him as well. So I'm going to jump into kind of a data dump. So if I go too fast, slow me down. I do tend to talk fast when I get going, but I want to kind of set the stage for, all right, so we're talking about these housing issues. What's the data behind what's happening, what's been happening, and then a little bit of forecasting. Obviously, we don't know the future, but looking at some, population projections and what does that mean for need for new housing. So just looking at the past, in terms of what we're permitting for new housing supply on the trend basis over the past 20 plus years. We during the Great Recession really started to fall way below that running average of that time period, and just beginning to catch up for building permits. So this includes single family and multifamily permits on hold. So we have an average of about 8,480, and then in the last couple of years we've been trending above that. But that's a long period of time right below that average. So we're still playing catch up with that. Now, looking at other regions of the state, so fast growing regions, North Carolina's, we're one of three regions that is basically 60-70% of the population of the state. If you look at the Triangle, Triad, and Charlotte region. But looking at the Triangle region in terms of what they're building, obviously they're a little bigger metro area. So they've got a higher average number of units, but recovered more quickly in terms of getting to that average, right? So they've been catching up for at least, I think, 2 or 3 additional years in terms of that running average. So let's look at Charlotte as well. Similar to the Triangle, and everybody was affected by the Great Recession, but again, catching up, maybe a year later than the Triangle region. And that higher average. So I think that's something important to think about as we go through today's session is, how do we recover from that lack of housing supply for those number of years, between really 2008 and 2019 for the Piedmont Triad region versus Triangle and Charlotte that sort of started to recover several years earlier in terms of catching up with that supply. Now, there's no why here in terms of what that is. There's probably multiple factors for the Triad in terms of trailing that. So let's shift gears a little bit and kind of break down the single family versus the multifamily building permits for the PTRC region. And so similar to that, the aggregate between the two residential housing types ran that deficit in terms of the average between 2008 and 2019, and just beginning to recover in 2020. And then if you look at multifamily building permits kind of all over the map, and, this is probably due to the fact that, you oftentimes, so you've got fewer number of units here, and then you've got, major projects that are approved in certain years. So that probably explains the kind of up and down factor there. But again, below average 14 out of those 23 years. So catching up in both of those categories. And just flip back to the single family for a second. A little bit more kind of consistency there, but you've got small 1, 2, 3 3-unit developments up to 50, 100, that sort of thing. So a little bit more of a trend there, where this is a little bit all over the map. Just obviously interest rates are a big topic that locally, regionally, we don't have much control over per se. But it's a factor there in terms of housing affordability, and somewhat for supply, right? So if you think about the smaller builders that may not have private equity or financing, they're out getting additional financing, outside sources, so they're at the whim of these interest rates in terms of the cost inputs and the borrowing needed to get projects up and going. So obviously that's something to consider. Not something we're going to be able to, sway the Federal Reserve on with our discussion today, but something to be mindful of. There's some easing of that of the mortgage rates recently, but again, kind of a headwind to housing supply is the point here. All right, so looking at some of the median sales price for the region. And again, thanks to Tony Jarrett with Alan Tate for supplying some of this information, and Melinda Ford for pulling this data off various data sources. But golly, this is quite shocking, right? I mean, we sort of know this, but just looking at the numbers in terms of that percentage increase just in the last 5 years makes the housing affordability quite a challenge. So, as a country, I don't want to make too many assumptions, but we're enjoying bigger houses, so that's part of the trend upwards in price, but it's across the board in terms of not just large 4, 5, 6 bedroom homes. This is also affecting smaller units as well. And so some definitely correlated to the sales price is the listing price as well. So similar trend upward as well for the same time period. And this is just kind of keeping track of how long are homes sitting on the market. And so you can see, that has been trending down. Obviously, you see that seasonal jump, right? So you've got a longer days in the wintertime, shorter days sort of in that spring, summer, fall time period, generally over that stretch of time. And then this sort of related to that is those active listing counts. So what, the longer it sits on the market, those active listings can creep up. So you're seeing that as in the last few quarters as that kind of creeps back up, the number of active listing counts as they sit longer on the market. So number of homes sold, just again for the PTRC region. Again, this is I do want to emphasize the 12 counties in case folks aren't familiar with that. So that's from Elkin to Mebane down to Troy are the 12 counties we're talking about for the Piedmont Triad. So Orange County, it would be Triangle, and then Rowan County and sort of south of west would be Charlotte region. So we're talking about the counties in the PTRC region. So these are the number of homes sold. And I do want to mention, I think Jose may have mentioned this too, that this presentation will be up on our website this afternoon. So you'll be able to download this information as well. So you don't need necessarily take pictures unless you kind of want to highlight some specific slides and some specific data that you want to look at later. So it's starting to trend down, obviously, with higher interest rates. And I think the other thing that we want to emphasize now, that big bump in 2020 was a lot of kind of relocation due to the pandemic, and kind of folks figuring out how to work from home. So that drove a lot of that on the higher number of homes sold in 2021. But that is trending down. The affordability, the interest rates are compounding the ability for homes to sell. So as fiscal stimulus kind of also starts to dwindle from the pandemic. All right, so there's a lot of lines on this graph. We'll break it down for you here, but no surprise here. It just kind of talks about that. We're talking about home sales, so just looking at rents as well in these metro regions. So you've got in the thick black line is North Carolina state average, and then you can see our 3 MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas. Sorry, I need to not use acronyms. We've got Burlington, we've got Greensboro, High Point, and then Winston-Salem also has a separate MSA. So that's tracked by those different metropolitan statistical areas. You can see a huge jump recently for the Burlington MSA. We're really all have jumped up as well, but that is trending higher. Greensboro, High Point metro area, Winston-Salem kind of is pegged to the state, and you can see the other metros around the state are increasing even more so on that affordability for rent. So I think it's important to also look at this data on the rent side. And this is from rentdata.org if you want to look at it some more. Okay, let me move on and talk a little bit about so what is this, I think that these next few slides are getting into some other kind of tangential topics, right? So this is like not tangential topics, but interesting other way to look at some data influencing housing in our region. So if you look at 20 years ago, mostly around 80% of folks lived in all the three metros and worked in them. And so, but in the Piedmont Triad, that's been trending down. So you can make some assumptions around that our affordability has been, better than the other two metros. So is that driving more housing demand here? That with jobs outside the region is probably a fair assumption here as well. As you think about those bordering counties, Montgomery County, Davidson County, Alamance County, to those other major metros, those are the ones that may be feeling the squeeze a bit more so than maybe other counties in the region. But again, so that they can be commuting to those other regions because of our, relative affordability to those other metros. I think is the assumption you can make here. Now, this graph may be hard to see, but it sort of breaks down that statistic and shows kind of where those folks are going. So it may be hard to see. So let me describe it. And if you can't see the front, there's some side screens there that might be easier to see for folks that are further back in the room. But if we look at our top 5 counties, so where residents commute outside the region, you got Rowan, Orange, Durham, Wake, and Mecklenburg. And so that's 74.5% work and live in the region. Now, if you just look at the jobs where workers are commuting outside the region, that's about 76.6%. So there is still some inflow, but there's more outflow from the region for folks that for jobs that for folks that live in the region, if that makes sense. Okay, so looking at a little breakdown of the counties and average housing costs as a percent of income, you can see that the urban counties of Forsyth, Guilford, and Alamance are up above 25%. Davie County's at 27%. Surrey County up above 25% as a housing cost as a percent of income. Rockingham County is on the low end, so that's driving a lot of housing demand up there with lower cost of housing. Question?
Yeah. Can you define housing costs? Is that the families' funds towards their housing, or is that the actual cost of a home?
Yeah, as a percentage of their income.
Okay.
So yeah, so it would be in the next slide, I'll kind of break that down and show you a little bit more. So it's looking at that housing cost in those particular counties in the next slide. So it's just the housing cost per census tract as a percentage of income. So you see there's, even though you've got some broad stats for each county, if you look here, let me scroll here, you'll see those areas that are higher cost of housing. You can see that in that darker red, purple by census tract. Those, so it's related to the actual housing costs in those census tracts as well as the general income. But you can see those areas that where you've got some real challenges in terms of affordability, and so what is the solution there? And that's what we'll talk about as we go through the day today, just kind of showing you some of the data. Okay. That's most of what I wanted to present. I've got a couple more slides. Good golly. Everybody want to read this one? So let me explain this humongous table. So we put some data together by county in terms of existing housing units and applied our growth projection, which is based on the U.S. Decennial Census and the state demographer county projections. So they do, the state demographer does county by county and municipal projections out in the future. And so what is our population projection for 2040? I don't have the let's see. We've got 771,000 housing units now. I forget the exact population projection for 2032, but if we look out 10 years, we're going to roughly need almost 60,000 housing units to meet just the basic state demographer demand. Now, remember, with these projections on our population, the state demographer doesn't look at, the latest economic development projects that have gone into this region. If you think about some of the job announcements that are coming online in the next 5 years, this projection data of 58,000 housing units to meet that population projection doesn't include some of that economic growth. So if you think of those five factors that influence housing demand, I mentioned earlier at the beginning of today's program, economic growth is part of that. So unfortunately, this data does not include that. So all of that's a long way of saying that could be a low number in terms of housing units needed if you look out 10 years. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is that's probably a baseline number based on the state demographer with the job announcements and other population growth and migration that could be higher. The other thing to think about too is that housing is, it's not all, it's, looking at this next piece of data, there's substandard housing. So even though we're building new units, other units may be in decline, right? So that's another kind of variable that's not accounted for in that data. So you've got the natural need for new housing units. You've got housing units coming sort of offline. You've got 1 to 5% of housing units that lack good plumbing. You got anywhere from up to 8% with lacking good kitchen facilities. So that could be driving demand, the need for new housing units as those units come offline. So all that is a long way of saying that the 60,000 to maybe something higher than that, 10-20% higher, that might be the need in the next 10 years. And how are we as a region, as the local governments, as our different companies working on this, trying to address that supply issue. So for me, I think the key takeaways, and I'd love to hear any feedback or questions that you have, is that the home prices and rents in our region have significantly increased. So that's no surprise, right? I mean, you could have said that. But I think looking, and the other thing to think about is it depends on where you are too, right? So looking at that census tract data in terms of housing affordability, that it can push you to certain parts of the region if you're at a certain price point. Fewer homes are on the market and are selling much quicker than before. So that's always a challenge. I think the other thing, not talking much about this today, but the demographics and the formation of new housing units. The millennial population. I saw an article today in the I forget what article it was there, but just the millennials are going to have a huge impact as they form households on housing demand. So it's not the same situation that we had in the Great Recession, where you didn't have a cohort of folks coming in demanding housing units right after the Great Recession. Now we've got millennials that are forming households at an alarming rate. So that's going to increase that demand. The other thing to think about too is that if you look at, I don't know if you can see on this slide, but I don't have it here, but if you look at some of the counties that are really building supply, your urban counties, it's not in this data, but most of the new permits are happening in Forsyth, Guilford, Alamance County. I think that the thing to think about too is how is supply being addressed in some of our more rural counties. I think that the program on Surrey County will really dive into some of the how do you address some of that housing supply challenge in our more outlying counties outside of the bigger cities. And then just the last point I'd like to make is you kind of think, what can you do in your jurisdiction to incentivize supply of housing? So think about that as we go through the day, as you go back to work tomorrow, and hopefully we'll arm you with some additional tools. But I'd be happy to take any questions or any comments you have or surprises you may have with some of the data presented.
Well, I do have one. Jess, you have an option to either raise your hand or enter in your question through slide. like to verbalize.
I'm sure you do.
With.
You're talking to, not talking to.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
One of the things I saw was when you're looking at housing supply and the need, it showed Surrey, Yadkin, and Stokes with the negative. But when you're looking at the canned numbers, that's not quite the same as looking at the whole picture and looking at the permits pulled, the number of available housing and everything else. So what I think what Jessica was trying to say is when we look at the Surrey event that we got because we delved so much deeper into it, you'll see different numbers. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Good, thank you. Any other surprises, questions?
Yeah, that the chart that or the graph that you showed with the outflow of workers or people who are supposedly working jobs in other areas, was that incorporating or looking at all at remote work? I mean, were these people actually traveling to jobs in other areas, or are they based here working for companies in other areas?
So that is on the map data, and I don't believe that it accurately counts self-proprietors or folks working from home and then remote work. I think is the it's evolving, but that's a good point. I think that's a good caveat to that map. Thank you. Leah?
Just a surprise about when you look at Randolph County's units that lack that complete kitchen or complete plumbing, what's the data source for that information?
Yeah, that is
Those numbers are surprising and
that's ACS. That's ACS data. So, and I'm gonna break down the acronym. ACS is the American Community Survey for census. Good question, Leah. Chris, do you have a question or comment?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. When you looked at the housing cost rise in there, just a quick math showed it to be about an 80% increase since I think it was 2018 until now. But then you got to add on top of that the interest rate that we're at. Today's interest rate versus 2020 is it results in about 87% increase in your mortgage on the same exact value house because of the interest rate. So you have a higher price house plus a higher mortgage go on top of that. And that cost of capital also parlays to development costs. We spend more to develop now. So it's good to keep that in mind. It showed the one piece, but there's really an additional piece to that when it comes to affordability.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So it's driving. Yeah, so the point is that that's even more extrapolate that rise between 2017 and now, right? Yeah, good point. Any other questions or comments or surprises from the data? Okay. Great. Jose, you got another Slido question?
No, looks like no.
Okay.
Questions, if anybody wants to ask, and it's Mike Shy, you are more than welcome to enter it in. Okay. If not, we will keep it moving.
Keep moving. Okay.
All right.
All right. Next on the agenda, we've got the Piedmont Triad Project Spotlight. So we've got several panelists to come up here. And, Jose, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Can we give Jesse a round of applause? Thank you so much for setting the stage in terms of the housing need in our region. So I would like to call up Adam Scholl. He's Assistant Planning Director of Regional Planning at PTRC. Cynthia Blue, she's Assistant Director of Housing and Strategy of the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department at the City of Greensboro. Samuel Hunter, Assistant Director of Neighborhood Services, City of Winston-Salem, and Don McKnight, Assistant Director of Community Development and Housing of City of High Point.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Just as a reminder, this is supposed to be a comfortable day. Get up, the bathrooms, the refreshments and everything are still outside the door at any moment. Let's take advantage of that. Have an enjoyable morning here. This is going to be a fun hour or so, and I will be moderating discussion. We somehow created the assistant director hour.
I don't know how we did that. We've got 4 assistant directors that has with valuable perspective. As Jose said, I'm assistant director of regional planning here at PTRC. Been here a little over a year. With planning housing issues is an interesting look. A lot of the times we're at the intersection of important issues and developments. You'll hear from me later about brownfields as an example of some of those properties becoming housing, which can happen often and be advantageous. But this is all about the 3 folks here. I've got some questions later, but they're going to talk to you about 3 projects they work on, or several projects they work on, again, from their influential positions in local jurisdictions and on the ground. So I'll kind of cede the floor to them one by one to talk about those projects, give some insights, and then we will have time for your questions. I've got a few prepared questions. Again, take a breath. I know we are right before lunch, so we won't hold you too long, but we have some valuable stuff. So we will, should we start with anyone specifically?
Start off with City of Greensboro. Cynthia Blue.
All right, great. So Cynthia Blue.
All right, morning all.
What the works.
Okay, I'm going to start out by talking very briefly about where we are in the city of Greensboro in terms of our housing work and our housing planning, and everything relates back to housing GSO. This is our 10-year affordable housing plan, which sounds like a really long time. Yeah, 10 years? No, it's whirlwind speed. We have 4 key areas that we're focusing on. The first is that access to home ownership. We were just talking about a little bit earlier, focusing on getting those first-time home buyers into housing. We actually span both, we work with the low mod population all the way up to a more moderate and workforce housing population in home ownership. We've got a really good track record in our programs of supporting particularly African-American households, first-time home buyers. We've got over 75% of our down payment assistance going to those households buying in our council districts 1 and 2, which is really great because they were the households that were just devastated by the subprime lending crisis in the recession time period. We're also focusing in neighborhood reinvestment. This is not redevelopment, if you're familiar with that term, and the blight designation that goes along with it. This is how do we go into neighborhoods that are functioning, that have leadership, that have assets, but need a little bit of work in order to stabilize and promote a healthy housing market. So we have 5 neighborhoods that we're working in under neighborhood reinvestment. The third key area is supportive housing. This is housing for high need and homeless populations. And if you've been following the news out of Greensboro and Guilford County at all right now, it is a very hot topic where we are. I don't know about all your communities, but we are just seeing numbers explode in terms of homelessness and particularly street homelessness in Greensboro and Guilford County. And the fourth area is affordable rental homes. And this is the area that I'm going to focus in on here today about one of the strategies that we are working with in terms of addressing affordability. From the plan was adopted in 2020. At that point, we had determined a net deficit of about 4,000 units affordable to those households that are below $30,000 in income. And it was projected out over the next 10 years to grow to about 11,000 deficit in affordable housing units for that income group. So that's the goal that we're working towards and hoping to make progress on. Also in Greensboro and probably many of your areas too, a large proportion of our multifamily housing stock is over 50 years old. So you're looking at a high need in those areas for preservation. And that's a key component of what we're looking to support in terms of keeping that naturally occurring affordable housing in our housing stock and affordable to our lower income households. So sorry, I'm going to have to switch to a cheater sheet because there's no way I'm going to be able to read that from the screen from here. These are some of the key areas that we are working in order to address some of these activities. The first is the creation of a preservation loan fund, and that's what I'm going to be talking about very closely today. The second is increasing our stock of affordable units affordable to those really low income households, those under 30% of area median income. We're also looking to create additional supportive housing units, again, targeting that homeless population, not to manage homelessness with shelters and transitional housing, but to end it with permanent supportive housing units. We're also looking to develop more short-term rental assistance programs. We saw the benefit coming out of the emergency rental assistance program during the COVID time period of being able to keep households stably housed. With the assistance before they ended up in homelessness. Greensboro is also working with the community and having active discussions regarding developing a community land trust model. We don't have one in Greensboro. There are others across the state that have been very successful. So that is in process. And again, homebuyer assistance, trying to make sure that with this rapid escalation in housing costs, that first-time homebuyers are still able to get their foot in the door. And neighborhood reinvestment activities. I'm gonna move on here quickly. So what is a housing loan fund? A housing loan fund is a private and public partnership. It is a capital pool that is put together, seeded generally by a capital investment from a municipality or from a philanthropic source. And that capital investment and taking that top loss position is what gives the banks the assurance to come in behind us with an addition of bank capital to the project at lower interest rates. It brings down the interest rates, provides additional security, and creates a pool of funds that can be invested in projects. So you can see some of the sources that we've got out there. The city of Greensboro is in for $5 million. We've got local philanthropic in at $2.5 million. Some other philanthropic, primarily that's coming from bank foundations of $5 million, and financial institutions coming in at $20 million. It's a $32.5 million overall loan pool that then gets invested into either a conventional structure, which is outlined here, where you have a developer putting up some of their own equity, 3 to 10% of the deal. The preservation fund coming in with that next tranche of money at a lower interest rate, which helps to bring down that affordability level, and then conventional mortgage for the rest of the deal. And then, so who are the players in the Greensboro Housing Loan Fund? The Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro, I'm going to call them our hustle player, because they were the ones who got out there, worked with the banks, raised the private capital, raised the philanthropic capital. The city of Greensboro's political leadership was solidly behind the $5 million of the city funds coming into it, but it was really the Community Foundation that raised the rest of it. They also selected the loan administrator. Self-Help Credit Union is actually the loan administrator for several of the loan funds that are active now in North Carolina. They are working with the Raleigh-Wake Loan Fund, the Durham Loan Fund, and they may be working with Asheville as well. And I know they're in talks with Winston-Salem, so they're out there working in this space. But the city of Greensboro really wanted an equity component to this housing loan fund. We didn't want a fund that was solely going to the established players, the high capacity developers. We wanted a fund that also could fund folks who are getting started, folks who are smaller capacity, folks who needed the additional help. So Self-Help was married up with the National Institute of Minority Economic Development's Institute Capital Division. They are a community development financial institution, and they are going to be providing that second that second division within the loan fund, targeting specifically those minority and smaller capacity builders. And the city's funds are going specifically to the ICAP portion of this deal. So the loan fund overall, it's a $32.5 million fund. Self-Help will be managing $22 million of the fund. ICAP will be managing $10 million of the fund. I will state that we are launching, hopefully about 3 weeks, with about $20 million locked in. We have commitments for the additional money, but they want to see the fund up and running. So the fund will come together. We're going to launch at 20 and we'll grow to 32 very shortly thereafter. So what does this look like on the ground? I gotta switch again because I can't read it. On the self-help side, again, self-help is focusing on those higher capacity developers. There's an affordability component built into all of these projects. they're looking at the larger projects, the bigger deals, and it can be acquisition, rehab, or mini perm financing. They are really focusing in on preserving that naturally occurring multifamily housing. They will go up to $8 million in total investment. This may be of interest to developers in the room. They will allow up to 90 to 95% total debt loan to value. So that's a little hard to get these days. And it's an up to 15-year term, but it can be interest only for that 15 years. So that's where you're starting to see that affordability component really come in for this. And just so that you know, all of the deals through these two sides of the pool are going to come with 20-year affordability restrictions. And then lastly, I'll talk for a minute about the ICAP portion of the pool. Again, this is targeted to those smaller minority developers and contractors, which is really ICAP's focus. They are an institution that is built around developing capacity. It's mostly targeted towards those infill opportunities, those smaller projects. Again, it's acquisition, rehab. It can be new construction as well. Deals up to their investment would be up to about $1 million. They will actually invest up to 95 to 100% loan to value. So they're looking at potentially doing the entire deal for a smaller deal. And where are you going to get 95 to 100% from a bank these days? You know, this is going to be a pretty good deal. It's up to a 7-year term with 15-year amortization. And I think the interest rate was running at about 3.5%. Last time I talked to them. Again, you see what that capital investment of the city's $5 million into this pool at 0% interest does to what they can then offer to developers going forward. It really brings down that interest rate. So this is where we are. We would be happy to have additional banks come on board. Right now we've got Pinnacle, Truist, and Wells are the three biggest investors right now, but we've got active contacts going with some other banks. So we'd love to see this pool grow, maybe maybe double it. Let's go for a $60 million pool and get this money deployed so that we've got projects coming online in Greensboro.
Thank you, Cynthia, so much. Any questions now, or are we waiting, Jose?
Wait till the end.
Okay, great. Jose's the expert here. We'll go next. I will remind folks, Slido remains open throughout the day, so we can capture questions there too, jot them down. We'll have time once folks are done presenting, but we'll go next to Samuel Hunter at the City of Winston-Salem.
Thanks, Adam. It's always tough to follow up after Greensboro. They always have a lot of good stuff going. So I'm going to talk about two projects that we have going on in Winston-Salem right now. And hopefully you all can take this back to your municipalities and think about some strategies that you all can implement and talk to your council or your management team about doing. So the first one is the Winston-Salem Choice Neighborhood Initiative. So you can see on these photos and I assume that's your top left, you can see that's the phase 1 of development. And that's going to be 81 units, mixed income units as well. But there's going to be a priority on affordable units. So price-based vouchers and low-income housing tax credits. And so what is Choice Neighborhood? Choice Neighborhood is a federal grant from Housing and Urban Development. We applied for this in 2019, received the grant in 2020 to implement 406 new units in Winston-Salem, predominantly for low to moderate income. But again, there are some mixed income and market rate units incorporated in these. You can see the elevation on your bottom left. That's what these structures are going to look like. These are garden style homes. We tried to make sure that these new developments look appealing to the community, make sure that they're appealing to the surrounding community. There's a lot of homeowners in this area. When they see new development, sometimes they can get discouraged or be frustrated that, hey, look, this is going to be your run of the mill standard apartment units, three-story units that don't look appealing. So we made sure that we put an emphasis on the design element of this project and made sure that it was appealing to everyone and fit in with the surrounding community. And partnership is a large thing about this. None of these developments can be completed without partnerships in our jurisdiction. So the Housing Authority, McCormick Baron Salazar, that's our lead developer for this project, and then Urban Strategies Incorporated, they handle the relocation. When you're doing different things like this at this scale, some people have to move away for a little bit, but making sure that you can have an organization in place to make sure that they can be taken care of during the moving process, make sure that they can provide some financial literacy passes so they can come back and be great citizens and great proponents for this community. So a little more details about this development. Again, this is a mixed unit, but predominantly for low to moderate income. There's 81 units in the first phase, and the remaining phase has over 300 units. You can see these renderings of the kitchens. These are not your standard, public housing amenities. These have granite countertops, quartz countertops, and then stainless steel appliances. And all of these were done at the help with other partners in the community assisting this financial grant that we received. There's some amenities in the community: fitness room, community rooms, areas for people to go paint and play, and children to get some after school care as well. There's on-site property management. There's a lot of different things that we made sure to include in this new development. I mean, you don't see things like this anymore. And we wanted to make sure that we put in a large emphasis on quality when doing these things. Providing housing is one thing, but quality housing is another thing. Jesse talked about, having kitchens and having the proper things in these units to make sure that people can have adequate housing. There's washer and dryers in all of these units. Most of the time you see in public housing units that people have to go to the laundromat. We made sure to make that we could include washer and dryers for these people that move into these homes, and just really give them a different outlook on their living situation, because it's important for them to take pride in where they live. Then they take pride in their community. They take pride of where they go to work and how they spend their money in their community as well. So the next one is the Flats at Peters Creek. And I think a lot of people can relate to this. There's a lot of abandoned hotels and motels that are in the community that are being underutilized and maybe, not utilized at all. So what can you do with those? They may be an eyesore. We've been toying with the idea of converting these hotel motel units into multifamily units, using some of the structures that are already there to convert them. This one specifically, it was in a bad shape, so we had to demolish it, and we're going to rebuild it. But with some other projects that we have and that we're in the talks about is using the existing infrastructure that's already there. That's at a lower cost. Just rehabilitating these structures and making sure that you can turn them into multifamily units. You already have the infrastructure there. You already have everything in place. You don't have to put any more asphalt down. You already have your water meters and electric meters in place as well. So, it's just really tapping back into those using your existing infrastructure. So this one specifically, this will be 62 units, and it'll be 1 and 2 bedroom units as well. They will have some property management on site. And it's making sure that we can just provide housing for everyone that needs it. Everyone doesn't need a 3 and 4 bedroom units. There's some seniors that need 1 bedroom units. And so we're making sure that we can provide that housing for them. So hopefully you all can take this idea back to your municipalities, talk about it with your leadership. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you all have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. We have one more presentation here from Don, and then we'll open up to questions. And I'm already sensing this is a 1 microphone room. So after Don presents, I will do my best to get to you. If you have a question you want to say audibly and not go through Slido, and I'll come back and just make sure folks can hear, and our recording is great. But Don, thank you.
Good morning. Okay, I'm Don McKnight. I'm the Assistant Director of Community Development and Housing Department for the City of High Point. Okay. Operation Inasmuch. Basically, the history of this activity that the City of High Point is a partner in is it was started in 1995 by a church in Fayetteville, North Carolina. It is now being implemented in 2,100 churches across 26 states and 5 countries. The day of service has extended outside the walls of the church to other for-profit and non-profit organizations. Okay. The City of High Point held its first event in the spring of 2016 in the Southside community using a public-private partnership model. The events have been held in fall and spring each year subsequent, except for when we had the COVID pandemic. Now, where did we get the name Operation Inasmuch? If you go to the Bible, the book of Matthew, Jesus said in chapter 25, verse 40, "Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me." So that's where the name for the Operation Inasmuch came from. Okay. Now, what is more specifically, what is Operation Inasmuch? Operation Inasmuch is a one-day event facilitated by the City of High Point in partnership with local nonprofits, faith-based organizations, businesses, and civic groups to provide home repairs to eligible homeowners at no cost. The city provides the funding and assists with logistics, planning for the day event. Housing Consultants Group is responsible for community outreach and homeowner engagement. And the Community Housing Solution qualifies participating households, prepares the scope of work for each home, and is responsible for volunteer engagement. Community housing, community consulting groups have been instrumental to the success of this event. Now, we target the core city area of the city for this activity. This activity is basically home preservation. So the city is providing funding for the preservation of homes that are within targeted areas of park, and with the aim of revitalizing those areas. So since 2016, there have been 1,578 volunteers who have donated their time and energy to 184 households. Now, we've recently had an event this year, 2 events this year, in the spring and the fall. And more recently, the last event was October 28th, which was just last month. And as you can see in this picture, we had an open ceremony at the Providence Church of God, where this is a shout out to Reverend Marshall Newsom, who is the pastor. He basically facilitated his church where we had volunteers to meet. They were served breakfast. In this opening ceremony, as you can see, Councilman Jefferson and Christopher Williams were in attendance. And we also had in attendance 2 former NFL players, Devon Marshall and William Hayes. They participated in the rehabilitation of these homes that were selected in the High Points area, where 78 volunteers and 15 households were assisted. Okay. If you can see in this picture here in the top portion of it, this is one of the houses that we basically provided a ramp for the homeowner. We constructed it, and basically the homeowner who had mobility issues was very thankful. We also landscaped her property with we basically got rid of a lot of debris that was in the front and back of her yard, and her flower gardens. We basically planted flowers in the flower beds, even mowed her grass. So there was a lot of activity at this one household. As you can see in the upper left-hand corner, former NFL player Devon Williams was basically, Devon Wilson was basically assisting in this effort. This is another household, as you can see, where a lot of painting activity and the reconstruction of the deck and the porch went on. There were, as I said, 15 households that were targeted with a lot of activity, basically involving the volunteers that were under direction of the more professional construction people. Again, there's some of the materials that we use, the flowers and the flower beds. We basically picked up the debris and using this truck that was basically hauled out to the landfill. Again, participation by even Assistant Manager Eric Almeida. We even have a picture right here where he participated, where we have people at all levels of government participating, helping households in the preservation of their homes at no cost to them. So we do this throughout the city twice a year, in the spring and the fall, and this is the most recent activity, which happened on October 20th.
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you to each of you for sharing that. Love how you all highlighted. I'm just impressed by the flexibility needed for whether it's public-private partnerships, interdepartmental collaboration, community groups on the ground, literally making these projects happen. And it actually reminds me, I was traveling recently and read about a community where there was a 3,000-word article about whose job is it to fix certain issues in the city, and housing is one of those where it's like, well, whose job is this? And just hearing you all speak, a great reminder that it's all of our responsibility. It takes all of us. It's not local government, it's not private, nonprofits and community groups. So thank you for sharing those details. I want to remind everyone out there, we're going to get to your questions. Please, we've built in significant time throughout this day to talk amongst each other and ourselves, because we think that's just such a valuable asset that we don't want to overlook as we have these kind of events. So we've got a little while for questions, and we're going to continue on into lunch with this idea that we're all kind of sharing together and talking as we're doing things. So, all right, that's enough for me. I saw a hand go up, so I'm going to run to anyone who wants to verbalize a question now. And we've got some questions via Slido appears that we will get to as well.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Felicia Jones. The gentleman from Winston-Salem, you talked about I was looking at the bedrooms. Was that 1 bedroom to 5 bedrooms, or 1 to 3?
Yeah, so we have 1 to 5 bedroom units in this development.
And can you give me a little bit of percentage of those that are renting the 3 bedrooms to 5 bedrooms, and what kind of families you're seeing? Because when you said 4 or 5, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, so a lot of that came from the needs of the existing housing that's in some of the phases. Some of these families require 5-bedroom homes. They have a family of 10.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they need to be accommodated. So that's why we have a couple 5-bedroom units. Yeah, that's why we have a couple 5-bedroom units in there. Majority of these are 3 and 4 bedrooms, but we had to include some 5s because there are just some families that needed to be accommodated that way.
And within those is it 61 you said units? 61 units? Was that what you said? 64 units that you're building in Winston?
For the motel,
No, the other ones are 1 to 5 bedroom, the luxury.
Oh, no, those are going to be 406.
406. Okay, for those inside, because I liked your pictures that you had inside for the 4 and 5 bed. Did it come with like 2 or 3 bedrooms?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I like the design.
Yes, ma'am. That's going to be the standard amenities throughout all the apartments, no matter what the bedroom.
So 2 to 3 bathrooms?
No, there'll be two bathrooms in some of the units. 1-bedroom units will have 1 bathroom.
I'm talking about the larger, the 4 and the 5.
Yes, ma'am. There'll be 2 bathrooms in those.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Who needs this?
Anyone else with a question they'd like to have the mic for? Okay, I see someone here. And we'll get to these in order as well.
From the gentleman from Winston-Salem, the units for Peters Creek. How quickly are you all planning for these to be done? Because I know this was something that's been in the progress for a while. So how quickly right now are we looking for this to be?
Yeah, so we have been in talks with the developer. They actually just came back to city council to get some more financing to start the development. So we're projecting that, they can be complete by 2025, but they just secured finances. So, and we know how construction costs go. So, hopefully by 2025, we can have people in these units.
Okay, looks like we might go to some Slido questions. And Samuel, you've been on the hot seat twice, so we'll go to Cynthia real quick. How will the new loan fund be deployed? How will projects be selected? You want
Okay,
to tackle that one?
yeah, that's fine. So the loan administrators, the loan administrators are actually managing the loan funds. They are accepting the applications. They will be making the funding decisions. So for the political folks in the room, the city is not controlling that process. It is being managed by the loan administrators.
That one above you as well.
Are there any more funds that come out of land trust aspects? Yeah, the land trust is still really in its infancy. We are working with the neighborhoods to gain acceptance of it. We have put together a short list of folks who will be on the advisory committee. So we are building that structure now. We do have a 501c3 that is being recycled from a former project and brought back to life. So we have a vehicle for the loan trust to operate out of. But what we need to do now is work with the community to set the parameters of when and where will a loan trust invest, how will it invest, where is the funding going to come from, and how much is it going to cost. All of that still needs to be put together. So we're a little ways out on having that actual launch for loan trust activities.
Okay, Samuel again. The bottom one might be quickest, and then we'll jump up. But so defining mixed income within the context of your projects, and if you can speak to specific AMI ranges.
Yeah. So the AMI ranges, they range from everything below 80%. So, 30, 50, 80. And then, so these are broken down. There's three, how the units are broken down is you have market rate units, and that's what makes it mixed income. Okay. You have your regular market rate units based off of market study. And then you have your project-based vouchers that come through Section 8 through the Housing Authority. And those are for low to moderate income. So, below that 50% threshold of AMI. And then you have your LIHTC, low income housing tax credit units, and those are below the 80% AMI. So that's how it's broken down in three separate categories. There's units designated for those three separate categories. So there's units specifically for the price-based vouchers, there's units specifically for the low income housing tax credits, and then there's units specifically for market rate units. Does that answer that question?
Market rate was over 80%?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
My question to that is, do you know how many units are gonna be designated to the, under rated? So I guess I'm looking for like a quarter.
Yeah, I don't have that unit mix in front, and I knew that question was gonna come up. I apologize. But I don't have that breakdown right now.
Because I know most of the time, a lot of those units get pushed towards market rate compared to one.
Yeah, so the good thing about choice, and why they call it choice, is the residents that are in that area have the first right of return. Okay, so for those units specifically set aside for them, and specifically there was 299 units originally there. So majority of those units are going to the low income housing tax credit and the price-based voucher. So there's way more units that are affordable than there are for the market rate units. A significant amount.
I think you have another Slido question that is really key. Site ownership and redevelopment projects being so crucial and so pivotal. So if you can read it, Samuel, I think that was in the context of your projects.
Yeah, so the question.
Yeah, the acquisition process question down here.
Okay, so what was the acquisition process for the motel renovation? Who owns the property? So the process for that is a lot of what happens is relationship building. Talking with the current owners of properties and saying, hey, look, what are your intentions with this property? The city needs housing. we'd like to purchase this property from you if possible. They have to be willing to agree to do things like this. So making sure that you build that relationship with the owners, talking through them through the logistics, talking about the plan that you have for their property, and then also, they're going to want some return on them selling the property. So you want to make sure that you can compensate them appropriately. So that's the process of doing that, building a relationship, talking to them, and then purchasing the property from them. Ownership. From my understanding, the city is the current owner of this property. But when you develop this, someone else may take ownership of this property, maybe the property manager or whoever wants to manage the property. I know for the Choice Neighborhood Initiative, some of the property was owned by the city, but it was transferred to the housing authority because they would be the property managers of the site.
I can speak a little bit to how Greensboro is doing that. We actually have 2 hotel deals in process right now. The city is not the acquiring party. We are working with a nonprofit called Step Up on Second, which is a company out of California, but they've spread their footprint to Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Tennessee. And they are one of the premier nonprofits in the nation, working specifically with permanent supportive housing for those really high acuity, high need homeless populations. And so they are looking to acquire 2 hotel deals in Greensboro. The housing authority has a request for proposals on the street right now for permanent supportive housing project-based vouchers. So that can marry up with these projects in order to provide the voucher assistance for the tenants. And the city has made a commitment to fund services, particularly for that gap between now and when Medicaid billing starts to become available through the Medicaid expansion, because there are a lot of opportunities through that funding source to be able to pay for a lot of the services. So it's a 3-party way of addressing the financial needs to make these projects successful.
Yes.
I may be able to speak loud enough.
You want to go for it?
I just wanted to know, we're all of the hotels vacant, like abandoned, vacant. I don't remember about the Regency, even though I've been in so many meetings now. And I know it was used for the homeless hotel.
It was
But-
not entirely vacant when
Okay,
we bought it, although we were not told quite how many people were there when we bought. But we didn't buy it. We made a loan to Partnership Homes. Partnership Homes acquired the property. We worked with Partnership Homes for 2 winter seasons to provide emergency shelter for those high need people who were basically going to die on the street if we didn't get them off the street. So we were able to house folks there for 2 seasons. We are like weeks away from the purchase being completed for Step Up to acquire that building, put it into renovation, and then before winter season next year, we should have those units online for permanent supportive housing.
So how did you handle those folks that were there? I guess that's been one of
We
the things
have-
that we looked at, because we don't have any that are completely vacant.
Mhm.
So that's what we're trying to figure out is
Yeah,
location.
if you touch it with federal dollars, you're gonna be paying federal relocation.
Yeah.
We used local dollars, and we followed our local relocation policy, and we did provide relocation assistance to folks. Made some people very happy who had been there for a long time, because it's based a lot on how long you have been in that living situation. So we had some folks who got some right nice checks, and some of them went out and bought cars, but
Another
that was their
story.
need. Yeah, that's another story.
Great. Yes, we had a Slido come in. Dawn, I think this is for you and project in as much funding, and particularly from the private or corporate support. Has that played a role maybe in the future as this project progresses? How do you see that happening? So, okay.
My understanding that the city is basically funding this activity with city general funds. Of course, we solicit and accept any corporate partnership to continue this preservation activity. So that's where we are currently. Let me see.
NFL doesn't have any dollars. Some revenue.
We hope somewhere down the road, this was the first time that we actually attracted that kind of attention for Operation In As Much. So we certainly do hope that we may be able to get some financial support. And when we talk about corporate support, we really lean on the private industry for volunteers, for them to bring those folks in to actually repair the homes. Money would be great, but we need the bodies as well. So the teams, the corporate teams and the private sector, that's really how they have participated.
Awesome. Great. We have a few questions. If you think of any, again, Slido stays open. Raise your hand, shout them out. The planner in the room, of course, starts toward questions about zoning constraints, and when we talk about housing and redevelopment projects. So I'll throw a couple questions in that vein at the panel and welcome any responses from out there too. We could start with just broadly. Have there been any significant regulatory or zoning challenges you've encountered in your jurisdiction or seen in the region when we're talking about housing projects and innovative approaches? So if you have any of those in your back pocket, any thoughts on zoning and changes needed when you're trying to do innovative things with housing?
Yeah, zoning is always a challenge. Folks are following the news in Greensboro. It's not restricted to lower income areas. We've got folks along Friendly Avenue upset because of luxury townhomes being built in their neighborhood. So it spans the gamut. What we have been working towards in Greensboro is a greater acceptance of the concept of gentle density and missing middle housing. And Greensboro did just submit a pro-housing grant application to HUD, which is focused on providing the funding for a code ordinance rewrite to allow us to be able to build those types of housing in areas where they have not been or cannot do that now without a zoning change. So that process is in the works for us. We're hopeful we're going to get the grant and that we would be able to move that forward, because the money associated with that grant would not only pay for the code rewrite, which is very expensive, but it also has funding for the community outreach and education necessary, as well as demonstration projects to be able to show people what this looks like, because we've all forgotten what it looks like. It's been so long since we have been able to build duplexes, triplexes, quads, and those smaller apartment complexes that can fit into the design context of a community and enhance that community. You can't build them now. So that's the direction that we're hoping to go in, and hopefully this grant application will help us get there.
Awesome. Any other response? Thank you. Good luck with the grant. Hope we get good news. We did have some Slido questions. We'll start with any of the three of you on state or federal policy changes that could support any of your projects specifically. If we want to talk about housing, renovation, and innovative projects too, you can speak to that. But there's other levels of government. Is there any role there, anything there that could support the work you're doing in your jurisdictions?
So I'll start with the state. Making sure that you speak with your representatives for your area. They have been large advocates for us when we apply for federal grants or go to the feds talking about, hey, we need to do this. They can put that stuff on the floor. They can make it aware and use their platform to share with them, hey, look, there's a need in Winston-Salem for this type of housing. There's a need in Winston-Salem to take care of this demographic. So making sure that you have a good relationship with them so they can use their platform to advocate for what you need. So there's no specific policy changes that have helped us, but it's really just making sure that, we have the lobbyists in place and we have the relationship with our representatives so they can advocate for what we need.
Yeah. There's been some really interesting stuff going on at the state in recent past, and some interesting marriages coming out of it, because you've got some very conservative leaning legislators who are of the, get rid of all the restrictions kind of bent. They're kind of married up with the more progressive planner types who are very interested in seeing some of these gentle density, bringing back these missing middle housing types, linking up together and talking together and really looking for ways to get the state to be able to foster that in more communities. Because right now, most communities in North Carolina, you can't build it. And so you see them starting to push back and push and say that, look, y'all don't get it together, we're going to do it for you. So that's out there, as well as in this year's budget process, funding for housing was there right up until the last hours of the budget, and it fell out. So, there's the push is there was support for it, but it just didn't make it over the hump. So the more that communities can be expressing to the legislature the need for additional support for housing dollars, to be able to help all of the state create more affordable housing, that's critical right now.
Yeah.
The federal government has put out I guess out of the Biden-Harris administration, more recently, policy change where they're providing funding, process of providing funding for the retrofit of government buildings. They're providing those empty buildings to state, local, and regional governments, if you will, to basically and providing assistance to basically plan and make those changes, making them available at the end of the day for multifamily housing. So basically, it's funding and consultation for the retrofit of those empty buildings. They're going to convey those buildings to governments for the local governments for the rehab and retrofit for affordable housing, multifamily housing. So I didn't know if everybody saw that. It was very recent. It came out about 2 weeks ago.
Okay, thank you for your questions. They're rolling in on Slido, so I'll try to take them in order. I think there was one for Cynthia about, thank you, Jose, the scroll helps. Just in general, what steps are you taking or the city taking to increase affordable housing stock?
The city's been investing very heavily in housing and has been for a long time. We were one of the first communities in the nation to develop an affordable housing trust fund. 1 cent of our ad valorem taxes is dedicated to affordable housing. We also, in 2016, the voters passed a $25 million housing bond, and in 2022, a $30 million housing bond. So with the 2016 housing bonds, we touched or supported almost 1,900 units so far. We'll come very close to 2,000 by the time we're done with those. The second set of the 22 housing bonds are coming in tranches. We're getting it $8 million at a time because the city can't afford the debt service on putting it all out there at once. So the first tranche of $8 million, $5 million of that is our contribution to the Preservation Loan Fund. And so the anticipation on that Preservation Loan Fund is that it will support on the order of the original projections were about 900 units of affordable housing. Interest rates may play with that a little bit and construction costs going up. We met the council goal of 1,000 units being produced in the 2016 to 2020 time period. And we right now have another 500 units that are going to be coming online next year. So we're pushing it out the door about as fast as we can and getting them built as fast as we can. But we're really looking forward to the Housing Loan Fund coming on board and being able to provide units outside of what we can do.
That's on that one.
Right, so we have one, Samuel Winston-Salem specific. I don't know if you've been able to read that one, but talks about set asides, 10% of the budget in units with roll-in showers. So speaking to how AMI percentages are harmonized with disabilities and just this topic in general with housing projects rehabilitation, renovations, and accessibility.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. 10% of the units were set aside to have rolling showers to accommodate, ADA compliance and people that may need that accessibility. How is that harmonized with AMI? Well, it depends on how they are receiving their disability. If they're, when they get their income from disability, that's how it partners up with the AMI, and that's how we determine the threshold. So, based off of their income, that's based off of some previous statements and whatnot. That's how we determine their AMI when they apply for these housing units for the flats at Peach Creek and other converted units. But we set aside 10% because, like I said earlier, there's a need for these. A lot of these units don't have wide enough doors. They don't have, the first level entryways for some of these that people that have disabilities. So that was a major thing when we were doing this. This was something that that is not always put at the forefront of people's minds. They think about, oh, we just need to push units, but they can't accommodate everyone. So we made sure to have this set aside in this specific development for people with disabilities.
Yeah, the question though was, how do you keep the people who need the accessibility in the units that are designed for the accessibility and not able-bodied people in those units?
So how do you keep the people with disabilities for those units and don't let other people that are not disabled in there?
Yeah, there's generally not an inventory of accessible units. And so when you go to match them, it's a matching problem.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, that comes in the application process as well. They have to identify that they have a disability. And also we have to make sure that we have the stock for that as well. If we have all those units that are spoken for or habitated, it's tough. But really making sure that when they do apply, when they come to the property manager, they must identify that they have a disability and that they need these units. We're not just going to put these units to anyone that just needs it. These are specifically set aside for people with disabilities and can identify and prove that they have a disability to occupy those units.
Yeah, if there are any low-income housing tax credit developers in the room, I know Bill Scantlin's familiar with this issue. Units are set aside within those projects for folks with disabilities. However, the referral process has some issues because the referrals have to come through the Department of Health and Human Services, and you don't always get timely referrals to be able to fill those units. And so what developers are required to do is to hold those units open for a period of time, but if they don't get a referral, they can go ahead and fill those units. So there's a disconnect. We know the need is out there. We know there's plenty of people who need those units, but there's a disconnect between the referral process coming in from DHHS and being able to fill those units. And that is something that has been ongoing for a long time. And I really wish we would get to a point where that could get fixed.
We have a follow-up there.
Yeah, I have a question, more so about home ownership. And two parts. One is, since we have City of High Point, in Greensboro, do you guys team up and collaborate on some of the issues that are at hand for home ownership? That's the first part. Second part is, with the home affordability being an issue, let's just say 400, 350 and below, are there initiatives or projects going on right now that we are doing to help that home ownership project?
Okay. So the city's contracted partner for homebuyer education and for the management of our down payment assistance programs, they do all the underwriting, they work with the lenders and work with the home buyers, is Housing Consultants Group, which is the same organization that is working with High Point on some of their programs. So we do have some crossover going there. But because of restrictions related to funding, our funding has to stay where we are. We can't fund things over in High Point. High Point can't fund things over in Greensboro. So our funding and our programs are targeted Greensboro. We do have homebuyer assistance as well that we operate for Guilford County outside of High Point. So there is homebuyer assistance available out in Guilford County as well. So the programs sort of operate in silos a bit, But for Greensboro and Guilford County, it's the same provider. And your question about helping those higher income households or affording those higher level home prices.
No, bringing the prices down. Are there initiatives that city or even the county are doing to help subsidize? Because that tends to be the issue, is the higher cost.
Right.
Say the developer builder doesn't want to do it because it's not profitable. And so that particular sector is the one that is getting hurt the most over the past couple of years. And in the foreseeable future, there's not enough units hitting the ground in that sector. Is there something going on right now to help bridge that gap? Because home ownership for those people is non-existent. They can't afford it.
We do subsidize single family housing development primarily through nonprofit developers, but we also have some money that has come through the American Rescue Plan dollars that is going to be targeted to small contractors, particularly in the tornado area. We are still working to rebuild back from the tornado of 2018, and we've got some additional construction needs in that area. We also, our down payment assistance levels have been increased due to rising purchase costs. So now I think we're maxing out at about $25,000 for down payment assistance. I know some of our larger metro areas, Durham, Raleigh, and Charlotte, are significantly above that now because their costs, while we think 350 is bad here, that's a bargain in those jurisdictions. So how far we can go in terms of subsidizing that, I'm not sure, because at some point you're putting an awful lot of money in, and we have to look at how do we maintain that affordability over time. And that's one of the things that the community land trust model is looking at, because the community land trust model takes the land out of the equation and holds it separately. So those rising land costs don't factor in over time. It brings down the initial cost for the initial buyer. It protects the affordability for the next buyer. Right now, our down payment assistance programs don't protect that affordability for the next buyer. It's sort of a one-time investment in a present buyer that it's a forgivable loan. So if the buyer stays there long enough, that disappears. So what we're looking at is how do we structure more assistance that carries forward and helps more people over time. It may restrict someone's ability to cash out in a rapidly rising market because it's a shared equity model where the buyer, the owner of a land trust model house gets some appreciation for the house when they sell it, but not as much as a neighbor who is not in a land trust model might get. So there is some restriction there, but it's a stepping stone for folks to the private market. And it's a way to protect that affordability long-term for anybody who may buy the property in the future. A land trust will hold the land with a 99-year, and it's a 99-year lease on the land. So it holds that affordability in perpetuity effectively.
I'll jump in briefly about what we're doing in Winston-Salem. So when we provide funding or loans to a developer, we put an affordability clause in there. Say, hey, it needs to stay affordable for a 15-year period or a 20-year period. So, making sure that, hey, we're going to provide you with this funding, we're going to provide you with this large sum of funding, but there has to be an affordability clause built into these when you're doing this development. And so that stays, even if a person sells the home, when an attorney does a title search, they'll see, okay, there's an affordability clause here, so it needs to stay affordable for that period of time.
Thank you all for participating so well. When we allotted this much time for discussion, we were like, how did that go? But y'all have been fantastic with all of your questions. We're not going to get to all of them, I can already tell. We have some time. See, we're 6 minutes to lunch. We're not going to make it talk and pay attention right up to the moment you eat. So I think we'll do one more question.
I think we can do a couple more.
Jose's telling me to go strong. All right, I'll go strong. And I will get to you. You have a question?
Yeah, just a little one.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how y'all looking at renewable energy on some of these projects. Especially the low cost on the rebuild of the motel for elderly people. That would be an excellent opportunity for them over time to get the, energy bill down for years to come.
So folks may have heard that just fine, but renewable energy and working that into some of these projects and housing projects in general. So what's that one first?
The city requires for all of its single family development that the housing meet the standards, the advanced energy system vision standards. So the houses are built to be highly efficient, and advanced energy actually offers a guarantee to the owner that those bills will not exceed a certain dollar amount. It used to be like about $33 a month. It's gone up a little bit since then, but the houses are built to be extremely affordable. We have actually worked with NCA&T's Center for Energy Renewable Technologies. They have had grants available to actually put solar panels on roofs of houses that have been built to the system vision standard. So we have been incorporating that on quite a few houses. It gets really difficult in multifamily, particularly low-income housing tax credit projects, to incorporate that type of additional, particularly solar efficiency. It just has never worked well, and it's one of those areas where we'd like to see it work better. But going back to these motel units and making them extremely affordable, that is a good point and could be something that could be looked at, because they are not going to be using that low-income housing tax credit financing model. They're using alternate sources of financing that could potentially support that type of additional energy efficiency.
Yeah, we've looked at using energy efficient appliances in these units, but we've never really toyed with the idea of solar panels or doing anything like that. So just to be blunt, we haven't looked at solar, but we make sure that we include energy efficient appliances in our development.
Well, I know the multifamily would be very different.
And not that the UNC School of Government needs a plug from me, but there is a historic resilience workshop series going on, and a group of us were there at a Revolution Mill yesterday talking about that. Actually focused on historic preservation, but also hazard mitigation. So some of these factors came to play in integrating those two things. That's a brownfield side as well. We'll talk about brownfields a little more, but it's a great question, and I think folks are figuring out how all that can work. We're going to do one more question. I saw a hand raised, so I'll be biased to the person in the room rather than Slido. You going to shout?
No, I just wanted you, if you could do the Slido question about rural communities.
Well, you know what?
Rural community.
I spent 10 years in a rural community working with local government, and I was keen on that question as well. So great. We'll end on that, or depending on. Okay. So the question, how can rural communities with less resources, less capacity, and less human capital replicate any of these examples in your three cases? So offer it up. Who takes it first?
I'll take it first.
All right.
I'll take a stab at this one. So, really, it starts with partnerships. If you all don't have the capacity inside your organization, reaching out to other players that do these things and see what they can do or how they can help you. If you don't have a study of your housing needs, it'd be helpful to get one of those in place as well. But really, it starts with relationships and partnerships with outside organizations and seeing how they can help you. And the biggest thing is using your existing infrastructure that's in place. If you have existing buildings or warehouses or something that are not being used or underutilized, using those and developing those instead of going out and doing vertical construction on something that is existing.
Yeah, the more rural you get, the harder it can get. For some of those slightly larger communities, you may have more assets than you realize. Assets can be in the form of major employers. Assets can be in the form of hospital systems. There are ways to bring together players outside of government that can help to provide investment capital or connections to the healthcare insurers. There are a number of insurers that are looking at housing as a way to help stabilize healthcare costs. And so they are looking at ways to invest in housing projects and housing solutions, as well as regional foundations and organizations that have particular focus on rural areas. You're seeing a lot more of that starting to pick up in the federal lens. They're looking at what they can do in rural areas. So there are possibly more resources out there than you think, and it may take some digging to find them, but it can be done.
I'll just echo that piece about federal level or even state with some of their scoring criteria on grants. I would mention FEMA BRIC, the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. USDA has several programs that explicitly call out rural communities and population size and giving you priority points. To the point of that context, once you get a grant, you have to administer it. And there's a burden there and a lot of work. So again, I echo our panelists with partnerships and collaborations, whomever can maybe take on that work with a little admin fee or something like that the grant can pay to. Just throw that out there. So Jose, I'm still going.
One question, lunch is currently getting set up. We should be ready.
Okay, so food's here. Do not worry. No, it's 11:46. The agenda says 11:45. It's here. Let's go with. I can answer the PTRC question later. That might be when we speak during lunch and we're all talking. So let's just talk ARPA since we're talking funding a little bit. Did ARPA funds play a role? Maybe what influenced or what impact did that have on the project? As we know, those funds are still kind of out there and being deployed. Anyone want to take that on?
Okay, yeah. The city of Winston-Salem, our city council set aside a significant amount of funds specifically for transformational housing and making sure that, there was some funding available to developers and to outside agencies that could come in and develop housing. So there was a significant amount of ARPA set aside for housing. I don't know that dollar amount specifically, but the majority of our ARPA dollars went for housing development projects.
I wouldn't say the majority of the city's of Greensboro's housing dollars, ARPA dollars went to housing projects, but we did get quite a few housing projects funded through. It was an open RFP that the city put out for eligible transformational projects. And I'm looking at Anna. We got 13 of them, I think it was, out of ARPA. So we've got quite a number of those in process now that are getting ready to come online in the next year.
And Nina, you may need to help me on this one, but I believe our ARPA funds are basically being earmarked for gap financing on one of the major multifamily projects that we're contemplating.
It's been proposed, has not
proposed.
been approved. Unfortunately, council has not allocated any of the city's ARPA funds for housing or affordable housing development. But through our department, we did receive the Home ARP funds, which we have not deployed any of those funds. We will be doing an RFP or an application process for that. And we received about $2.9 million, somewhere around there. And the majority of that, we're using about 80%, 90% for housing. So yeah, through our department, we're a small entitlement, so we don't get a lot of those block grant funds, but the majority of our funding will go for housing projects.
And the only thing I will follow up there, and forgive me for getting into a weed or two, but with ARPA funding, whether you're in a large jurisdiction or one of our small rural communities, anyone that this is more for local government, apologies. But revenue loss funds, please come talk to me if that has not been elected in your jurisdiction. Even if you are a larger one that has $100 million in ARPA funds, 10 million can still be that revenue loss category, which, long story short, loses its federal character when designated in that fashion, making a housing project or any other project insanely easier than using funds that carry all that federal weight.
Yeah, we watched all of ours.
Yes. converted them to revenue loss funds and the general fund. Yes, that's what we did. Okay, so I think that is, can we please thank our panelists and give them a round of applause?
Over some highlights, and then we're going to turn it over to some staff members and some members here at the summit to talk about some of the resources they've shared. I wanted to start talking about missing middle housing. That was brought up a couple of times. I think that was brought up in one of our questions for the survey on things you wanted to hear about. And if you don't know about missing middle, it is a term that was created by Opticos Design. It's been going around for the last several years, and it's to describe housing that is all between single family houses and apartments. And I think we can agree that in our cities, in our town, we do single family very well. We do apartments very well. And arguably we do townhomes well sometimes if the zoning code allows it. But there's a variety of homes in between that spectrum that sometimes our zoning codes don't allow for. So missing middle is defined as a range of house scale buildings with multiple units compatible in scale, and form with detached single family homes located in walkable neighborhoods. And I wanted to put a local perspective on this. So Opticos Design actually went to City of Greensboro. They were hired by City of Greensboro to do a missing middle housing scan. And that was back done in 2021. And it really highlights the need for regulatory change. And the report says too often the types and size of new dwellings that market wants are not allowed by local policy and zoning regulations. This leaves innovative developments needing to go through complex and uncertain review processes when trying to respond to the shifting market. Regulatory change is needed to make the new investment predictable and simple. So when Cindy Blue was talking about the grant to change some of the zoning ordinances in Greensboro, so this pretty much stems from this report. So they're trying to bring this report and bring it into action. Opticos looked at pedestrian plans, long range plans, area plans, and it also looked at what areas are walkable, which areas are ready for missing middle housing, and it also designated areas that are just automobile oriented that doesn't really fit for missing middle housing. So I encourage you to check this out, and just to back up a little bit, in your packet, you'll see a housing resources highlight document, which includes a QR code and the link to our website where we will have all of these documents. This is a 60-page document, so we didn't want to print too much. I see a question.
Can you go back to that first slide, please?
Yes. And also this PowerPoint is already uploaded into our homepage for the summit. There is a book for missing middle housing. You can go to opticosdesign.com and you'll get more information, but it's just a really cool way to talk about different type of housing units. And it's prevalent in our communities now where we talk about missing middle. And we can help as a cog to look at your zoning ordinances and make sure that they allow different variety of housing. And if you have any questions about the missing middle housing scan, you can contact Russ Plug, long range planning manager at City of Greensboro. And I will bring it over to Desi Day. He's going to talk about the Western Piedmont Housing Toolkit.
Thanks, Jose. Hope you guys enjoyed lunch. Happy to highlight this briefly. I think thinking of the missing middle topic that Jose just introduced, this is really a toolkit that applies that missing middle concept in looking at a region, right? So Western Piedmont Council of Governments is in Morganton, Hickory area, so west of the Triad. Maybe similar communities to the Triad, mill communities, that sort of thing. So this is kind of taking that concept and then applying it and looking at existing development in that region to say, okay, here are some ideas on how we can talk about density differently. Here are pictures of what higher density housing is, your traditional neighborhoods, that sort of thing. So trying to take off maybe the baggage from some of these terms and say, all right, this is what this means in our communities. So it talks a bit about infill development. How do you look at your zoning code to add accessory dwelling units, gives those case studies, talks a little bit about housing supply, and then the housing types. Jose touched on it, and I think some speakers touched on it this morning, is that the market is looking for different types of housing, not just single family or multifamily, but that missing middle. So this is a great tool that sort of builds off of that There's another thing I wanted to highlight as well, and that there's a hard copy here. I will mention all these resources we're talking about are on the website, which I think you just said. Right?
Yes.
So sorry. You can download this as well. There's one other thing I wanted to highlight. If you guys have a chance before the end of lunch, before the end of today, Treebeck, which is the Triad Real Estate Business Industry Coalition, had put together this kind of flow chart of how do you get from a piece of land to basically a residential subdivision built, and talking about all the steps. I didn't count the number of boxes that are in here, but there's probably at least 100. Thinking through the steps and the time involved in that, so give you a concept of just all the, if you're sort of new to this concept, you can kind of find out the different processes there. They're putting together a video that should be available, I think, in 2024, that walks through this flow chart as well. But take a look at it. Get overwhelmed by looking at it if like you I and others have done, but I think it's really helpful toolkit. So I'm going to ask Michael Blair. Do you want to sit back there and talk? We bring you the microphone. There's got something.
Yeah. Before we go on to Michael, I just want to clarify the flow chart is not going to be part of our website, so please take a picture of it if you're interested in looking at it before you leave.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Michael Blair, Community Development Director here at the PTRC. Forsyth County, actually, 2 years ago, we applied for some of their ARPA funds, and it was for $150,000 to study the housing needs of intellectually and developmentally disabled individuals in Forsyth County. What we ended up doing actually is looking at what is the population, because no one really knows. There's some old 1996 numbers that people usually use, say 3% would be IDD. Well, we actually went through a process with a consultant to talk to all the different agencies that serve IDD individuals, and to figure out there's probably about 700 to 800 people with IDD issues in Forsyth County. Also was a pro forma model. So our plan was to get all this information, find out what the demand is, and then actually try to see if we can figure out how to partner with somebody to build housing along with supportive services for IDD individuals in Forsyth County. So part of that was a pro forma. So it's a process that a consultant firm went through to figure out exactly where a good location would be, what would be an ideal location for this type of housing, but as well as coming up with sort of options, essentially, when you're looking at all market rate, blended rates, additional IDD rate, 20%. So it just breaks down your rental rent range, your annual rents, net operating income. So obviously, when you make it very affordable for IDD individuals and everybody else around them that's in that property, you're going to end up with a much lower NOI. However, I think what the whole purpose of this was to educate whoever we're talking to when we get to the point where we're choosing a piece of land, possibly redevelopment, to bring that forward so we can actually use that information. And I will add that we used the 3 reports that we came up with this IDD study from Forsyth County that they funded to get $5 million from Senator Tillis's office for this project. If the federal government continues to function, we should get that next year. So when you do a small study like this, you can end up accessing a lot more funding, especially from the federal government. But that was the plan. And actually, all 3 reports are on our website under the Community Development Department area, so you can download those at your heart's delight. So that's all I really have.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Who's going next? All right.
All right, next up, we have a dear friend of mine and mentor, Dan Curry. I had the pleasure of working with Dan Curry at the City of Greensboro on the Willow Oaks redevelopment area. He's going to give us an update on how that's going.
All right, thanks, Jose. Mentor, I'm not so sure, but yeah, we taught each other as we went. And Jose was actually the project manager for this program for a number of years.
before coming over to PTRC, so he could be doing this presentation as much as I could. Willow Oaks is a mixed income, mixed use development in eastern Greensboro. It was interesting to listen to Sam Hunter talk about the Choice Neighborhoods program because Choice Neighborhoods is actually the new improved model of a former HUD program called Hope 6. And Willow Oaks was one of the Triad area's Hope 6 projects. There were a number of them. I think each of our larger cities got at least one Hope 6 project in the mix. Hope 6 was designed to take a severely deteriorated public housing site and revitalize it into a mixed income development where residents that were there that wanted to stay could stay, but they also had the option to take a voucher and go somewhere else. This was the former site of Morningside Homes, which was a 380 unit public housing site. And this started back in the late 90s with extensive amount of planning work and work with the community, and came up with a traditional neighborhood development plan. Traditional being the architectural design of the community followed traditional architectural patterns. You can see here the kind of the central part of the community, which was actually where Morningside Homes was located. This was the property offering that went out to builders in the early 2000s. Between 2000 and roughly 2006 and 7, it was a very active development project. And then the recession hit, and it just came to a complete halt. But that initial period, we got 3 tax credit projects, around 200 units of rental housing, and close to 100 single-family homes in the mix as well. Took about 6 or 7 years break while the housing industry tried to figure out what was going on. And then about 4 to 5 years ago, we finally got work started again in the community, building mostly single-family homes for the last few years, but we're actually now also starting to build some twin homes and duplexes, kind of getting into the missing middle concept, and have some small-scale multifamily units as well. A couple pictures just to show you kind of the design flavor of the community. Single-family home up on the left. Upper left was by True Homes, which is a large-scale a builder here in the Triad area. Upper right is actually a Habitat home. Habitat's been one of our very successful builders in Willow Oaks. Lower left is a twin home. We've got a number of those twin homes. They're side-by-side for sale units. We also have a builder. Jeremy, where are you? Raise your hand. Jeremy Simpson back there. He's built a duplex, which is side-by-side units where an owner buys both sides, lives in one half, rents the other half. It's kind of a wealth building opportunity for a homeowner. And he's also building, getting ready to start building some additional twin homes, which are the side-by-side for sale units. The lower right is an example of some of the townhomes that were built in the early days of the project. We've got row housing kind of style like this. We also have some craftsman style bungalow townhomes, very attractive units. We've got opportunities still for builders, although I would say at this point, we have maybe 30 or 40 lots left. There was a question about what communities can do to make housing affordable. One of the things we're doing here, and I challenge you to find lots anywhere in one of our urban areas where you can buy a fully developed, everything's installed, infrastructure's installed, sidewalks, street trees, building pads graded, and buy that lot for between $10,000 and $20,000. Now, if you can find that deal anywhere, that's one of the ways we make it happen. Is it does take a lot of funding to do that, but once you get that property cost down and you have build-ready lots, that's what we're offering in Willow Oaks. So any developers out there that are looking for a place to build single-family or small multifamily, we're welcome to talk to you. You can call Carrie Hobson at City Greensboro. She'll be glad to take your application to do that. Let's see. Anything else I should mention?
What's in the document?
Okay. It's a standard building application where the developer that's doing this work is actually Greensboro Housing Development Partnership. So they work with the developers, get developers approved. Standard information is going to be, a little bit about you as a developer, what your experience level is, what your financing will be for the homes, And then a little bit about what you're planning to build, whether it's single family, attached housing, prices. You don't have to tell us your design. That comes a little bit later down the road. We do have pretty strict design controls, as you can probably guess from the pictures. So excited to see this project finally coming almost to completion. Hopefully within the next year or two, we'll have all the lots sold.
Yeah, just stay around now.
Yeah.
And just a couple more things about that project. It's just an example of just putting yourself out there. Even as a large city of Greensboro, we had property available that builders didn't know about. And this perspective was a vehicle to share to the building community that, hey, we have opportunities available, especially in a distressed area, which is a good segue into the next session with Surrey County Housing Summit. And one more thing from Dan. Dan talked to us about the Housing Matters to NC podcast.
Yeah, sure. So there's some really good resources for general information about housing in the state or in the country. Before I talk about the North Carolina Housing Coalition, I will also give a plug for the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So the National Coalition, if you want to know anything about any federal program that deals with housing, they have a resource page on their website. It'll tell you exactly what you need to know about each program, what the status of it is, if it's funded, not funded. It'll even give you advocacy points if you need to advocate with your local legislature to, get more funding into a particular program. That's an incredibly good source. It's up to date all the time. So I would recommend that. The North Carolina Housing Coalition is another excellent resource. And if you haven't plugged in, if you want a really productive 15 minutes during your week, every Tuesday morning at 9:45 in the morning, the North Carolina Housing Coalition does a call. It's a phone. You call in on your phone. It's not a two-way conversation. It's a one-way conversation. They're going to run through federal, state, and local issues around the state. It's 15 minutes. And the nice thing is, if you can't make that 15 minutes, they record it. They put it on their website. It's in the podcast form. Either you can listen to it or you can read it. I find it to be probably as efficient on the 15 minutes as I have during my week. And if I miss it, I can go back and read it. It's a tremendous resource. You can feed information to them if you have a local program project that you want them to highlight across the state. Just give them a call and they'll put it into their weekly podcast. I find it extremely helpful. So
great. Yeah. Thanks.
All right. We just mainly wanted to share these resources and for you to be able to take away these resources. It's right in your packet. You have a QR code where you can access all of these documents. Also, if there are any other resources that you feel should be mentioned, please feel free to email me or contact me. We can add them to the website, especially resources that are local to your community that you want to share with the region. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our third session today, which will talk about the Surrey County Housing Summit. You're probably wondering, why are we talking about a housing summit in a housing summit? It seems a little bit like a Russian doll, but there is a method to the madness. So I'll go ahead and introduce Chris Knopf. He's a Surrey County Manager. Also, Michael Blair, Community Development Director of PTRC, who will be facilitating this conversation, as well as Chris Younger, JRN Development and Offsite Tech Business and Government Strategist.
Thank you, Jose. And yes, this was a summit that was inside a summit. It was, again, a stacking doll. But back in June, we did hold a housing summit in Surrey County. And you might ask, why did we do that? And what were we looking for? And what were we trying to accomplish? I think the main thing I would say is to take back from this is it wasn't like your typical housing summit. It was set up more like an economic development summit. In the way it was designed to encourage developers to take advantage of the opportunities that were in Surrey County. And what we'd like to start with is actually with Chris Knopf, who's the county manager of Surrey, and his idea to do this and how he came to it.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about our efforts over the last couple of years.
I'll take you back to 2018. Housing really wasn't on my radar screen. A lot of other things were, but as I would go out as my role of manager and attend community meetings, go to Rotary Club meetings, chamber meetings, realtors especially started sort of approaching me and talking about the lack of housing stock and the demand and their inability to meet the needs of the customers that were coming through their doors. And that continued off and on. And it was really just more informational. Nobody was really asking me any questions. They were just kind of, I guess, their grievances were passed along to me as they ran into me. The next year, I continued to hear the same things from them, but one thing changed. I started hearing it also from local business owners and CEOs. Specifically, I was touring Altec Industries in Mount Airy. It's our largest taxpayer and one of our largest employers. And Ben, who's the general manager there, came up to me and started talking about his challenges with recruitment and retention because of a lack of housing. And the recruitment that he was successful with, those folks, those engineers specifically, were living in places like Clemens, Louisville, Kernersville. And over a period of maybe a year to 18 months, they would eventually leave him and find a job closer to where they were living. And it wasn't that they didn't want to live in Surry County. They just couldn't find anything acceptable. By the end of 2019, one CEO in particular, we had a similar conversation. And at the end of it, he looked at me and he said, "What are you going to do about this?" And I'm a planner originally. I was a planner, wasn't always the management. And I told him I would look into it. I started to have a discussion with a gentleman who I was a very good friend with. He worked for the Department of Commerce. His name was Darren Rhodes, worked for the Rural Economic Development Division. We'd worked together for many years. And we started talking about an idea to somehow, number one, try to determine what the real issues are. Basically a housing market study. And finally, we needed to have some sort of pitch. We called it a summit. From my perspective, we needed to get an audience of developers who weren't in our market to come and sit with us for half a day and let us pitch our community to them, assuming that the market study came back with information that was going to support that pitch. We kind of rolled into early 2020, the pandemic hits. This project's put on the shelf. Other things are more important. But then in the summer of 2022, Darren Rhodes, unfortunately for me, had moved on to a position with the city of Albemarle. And I pulled the project back off the shelf, and I brought together our 4 city and town managers in Surry from Mount Airy, Elton, Dobson, and Pilot Mountain, and talked to them about working together as a team and picking this project back up and moving forward. We brought Michael Blair in from PTRC. He also runs the Surry County Housing Consortium, which is an initiative that we're the lead agency for. It covers not just Surry, but Stokes, Davie, and Yadkin counties. We brought in our economic development president, Todd Tucker, at the time. And then we also brought in Andy Scott, Cindy Dancy, who couldn't be here today, the 2 consultants we ended up hiring. We decided to move forward with both of them on a housing market study. And we also expanded our committee. We kind of created a steering committee. And we brought in basically all the folks in our community that had been sort of approaching us, realtors, mortgage brokers, some elected officials who also were realtors from our 4 towns. We brought in 2 CEOs of our hospitals. We were fortunate to have 2 community hospitals, one in Mount Airy, one in Elkin. They also were experiencing challenges with recruiting talent. And we started working with Cindy and Michael and Andy in August of 2022. And that culminated in a summit this past June at downtown Elkin. So that's sort of the background, how we got started. And I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you, Chris. And when I was approached with this, I didn't really know what to do either. And kind of like Chris was originally. And by setting this up the way we did, it ended up providing data that we were able to use. And I think this first slide that's up, if you look at building permits in Surry County, there's basically dropped down to nothing over the years, especially after 2007, 2008, just like in a lot of rural counties. I mean, this happened in Guilford and Forsyth too, but you all kind of like, have recovered a little quicker than some of these rural counties. Next slide. So basically, it was done in 4 phases. And like I said, it wasn't done like a typical housing summit. So a steering committee was set up with those managers, basically of the 4 towns, the CEOs of the companies, along with some other interested parties. And basically there was, I think, 3 or 4 meetings of the steering committees that actually provided the data that we would use in the summit. Phase 2 was, again, identifying strengths and weaknesses. Basically, and this was, again, Andy Scott and Cindy Dancy were going out and engaging all the different stakeholders that would be interested in housing in Surrey County. And then basically what they did with their report is, it's not really over yet either, because they're going to be coming back to the towns of the county with recommendations to help facilitate development with a review of their own land use and planning processes they already have in place. And then phase 4 was that housing summit, which was in June. Next slide. So what we presented to folks really just, surveying. Chris mentioned talent retention. How you hire somebody, you hire a young engineer out of NC State, and they live, in Winston and drive up the hill every morning because they can't find any place that they want to live in Mount Airy or Elkin or Dobson or whatever. So basically, what do they need? If you look at this apartment rental units or townhome or single family rental units, that's, 6.9%, and single family homes for purchase for basically in the average responses. Basically, again, for recruiting, how do you convince, because there's a lot of manufacturing that's started up in Surrey County over the last few years that's expanded, and they need to have employees that can actually manage these projects. Next slide. And so again, there was basically listening to developers. One of the things we normally do, and in my field, I basically worked at Greensboro for several years too, but I didn't really ever listen to developers. I didn't really know what they needed. I didn't care what they needed. Do you want the money or not to build the affordable housing or whatever? I mean, it's just, that's not my field. I'm not a developer. But what do they look for? Jobs, population growth, water and sewer availability is really important. And then, of course, I think Guilford, probably not such a big deal, but you get outside the rural areas, water, sewer is important. And you have to work and know what land is going to be good for development. And quite frankly, it just wasn't enticing to people without some knowledge first. Next slide, please. So, there is some inflow of movement in Surrey County. The population growth is not extreme like in some places like Mecklenburg or Wake or Guilford or Forsyth, but it is staying stable with slight growth over the last few years. Next slide. But the income has actually gone up quite a bit in Surrey County, mainly because of those manufacturing jobs, I think, which has raised it over 50,000 for the first time ever, I think, in Surrey County. So we've got the income, and then 30,000 employed in Surrey County. So next slide. Just looking at the 1-year job growth, Pilot Mountain area has the most, and that's the closest to Forsyth. Elkin area, and then Mount Airy, Dobson, and the rest of Surrey County. Next. And basically what the consultants did was 30-minute drive time surrounding each one of these areas. That's assuming that 52 doesn't get backed up. But what the population, 30-minute drive around each one of these increases as you get to Pilot Mountain because of the proximity to Forsyth. But again, developers are looking for people. They need to know if they build something, people will be there to buy it or rent it. And they know that if they do that in Mecklenburg, or they do that in Wake, or they do that in Greensboro or Winston-Salem, people will be there. But do they know that about Surrey? And that was part of this. And of course, the large job manufacturing in the general region here for the last few years has increased dramatically. And this is the good part. Only 19% of the housing units in Surrey County were built since 2000. I mean, it really crashed. I mean, you're maybe 250 units a year prior to 2007, and it just bottomed out, essentially. And the population stayed basically stable. And then multifamily units are 9.2% of the housing stock. 23% are mobile homes in Surrey County. So that presents an issue too, because most of them aren't new mobile homes, and that presents an issue to the Section 8 program that we have in Surrey, Stokes, Yadkin, and Davie, because the available affordable properties are oftentimes mobile homes, and they don't pass HQS. Next, please. The vacancy rates, 26% renter, 74% owner. I don't know how that matches up with the urban areas. I think the ownership rate might be a little bit higher, but that's where it is in Surrey. Next. And then if you look at the homes listed for sale, it's kind of hard to see, but in the different subsidized, affordable, middle income, upscale, and luxury, you go onto Zillow or Trulia, there's just nothing there. So it's really limited, especially when they're looking. So if you got a job at Alltech or one of the other places in Surrey, when you want to buy a house, you find a piece of property and spend $500,000, build your own. So next, please. And then, extremely limited housing market. And a lot of this is just supply. If you look, remember, only 19% have been built since 2000. So there's no supply. And so rents do go up, and rents are actually going up in Surrey County and the other counties, the rural counties around here, almost as fast as in Winston. You've got single wide mobile homes in Stokes County, 3 bedrooms, single wide. Think about that for a second. $1,300 a month. So next to a junkyard. So that's what we've got, and that's the influence of the housing market in general, which is impacting those areas. So, the demand, household 7% growth, housing units down 1%. So gap. That's what. So, what were we supposed to say? Why is Surrey County a great place to live? It is in the foothills. I mean, it's got some natural benefit to it, and natural, hiking trails, and it's close to the Blue Ridge Parkway. And it's had job growth actually over the last few years, which is pretty impressive compared to a lot of other rural counties. And then also, as Chris mentioned, with the 2 hospitals, they hire a nurse, they hire, their doctors are going to find some place to live, but everybody else that works in the hospital has a hard time finding some place to live. So that was an issue. And then just retention and attraction. It's an economic development issue. Housing is an economic development issue. You can't have that growth if you cannot house the people that are going to, participate in that. Next one. So what we did also is actually identify sites that had water and sewer that were not necessarily on the market. Talk to the counties, to the county and to the towns. They were able to tell our consultants exactly what was available. And then basically, once the summit was over, we had shuttles to actually take developers to the different sites with a person that worked for Elkin or Pilot Mountain or Mount Airy. And, the whole thing was based on that developer's perspective. And that's what we tried to do, because we wanted affordable, we wanted Missy Mill. And it was basically everything under the doctor's house with the big line. I mean, that's what we're aiming for here. And what are they looking for? And I think this can segue here to Chris. And what I'd like to do is just hand this over to Chris Younger, who I did meet actually at the NCCDA conference in April. And we were planning this summit, and he did a presentation. And I said, hey, you have to come to this summit. We need more developers. And he agreed. So.
And now here I am. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Chris. That spawned into also going to the Western North Carolina. It also spawned into the North Carolina Housing Finance, where we spoke as panelists at all those. And now here today, and we appreciate the opportunity. A couple of things that I would address really quickly about what attracts, some of the things that attract the developer to a community, why we might be interested in your area. One is I'm a former economic developer myself, so I look at the economic development side when it comes to jobs and housing, how they're tied together. The one slide we had on there where it showed some of the announcements, that is very indicative to us to look at this area when we look at jobs coming. We know that Surrey County has historically in the last several years had a decline in population, except for just recently, I think it was last 1 or 2 possible years, a slight increase. That paired with the job announcements going on, and then also make it look as if this is a good spot for growth. Also looking at the motivation of the county. Do they want housing? They need housing. Everyone knows what you need, but do you want it? Are you going to work and be creative with this to get what we need to make housing there for you? So we look at population. We look at income. Income is a little bit, it's important to us, but it's a little bit further down the list because we know if we get with a community that is willing to be creative and think outside the box, not just use standard tools, then we can come up with a product that fits the income, fits what the county's needing at the time. So we look at those things. We talk about missing middle. I want to just point that out real quick too. Missing middle when you're talking to a developer means 2 things. One is the structure itself, like we saw, Jose put up there on the screen about what those can mean. That's one. The other is the missing middle is the person, is the income. We all know what affordable housing is. We all know what market rate is. We often have that missing middle, that 80 to 120, 150 AMI. That is a struggle to hit. We have subsidies out there and funding for affordable housing. Market rate sells itself, but everything in the middle is difficult to get to. And that's when we need help with communities and municipalities, county and town both, to help us with infrastructure, maybe some low interest loans, some housing tax dollars, things like that we can get into without having to go through the typical hoops of housing trust funds, LIHTC, government money that is economic developer former here, government money is slow. So we all know that housing is way behind. And so sometimes we got to get a jump start. We don't have time to wait on government money. So we look at local government money, possibly. So those are things that attract us to a community. It's also about, of course, is housing going on there? You guys, like you said, your housing hasn't been new in a long time. You definitely need it. You've got a lot of economic development going on, so you got great potential there. And everyone we met so far in Surrey County has been very willing and motivated to work with us outside the traditional toolbox to make it happen. So I guess it answers that portion right there, right, Mike?
Yeah, and basically kind of the result of all this, I do know, and I can't really say exactly what they are because this only happened in June. There are several sites that our developers were shown in Surrey County. I do know that most of those sites have some interest in them now. I know that, for instance, Chris's company may be looking at some, but is also interested in possibly, asking for some of the home funds for more affordable units in those properties. But in general, I think everybody at the summit, at least from what I saw, there were 6 developers and their staff at the summit, which had about 75 people show up, and a lot of those were developers. So it kind of, from my point of view, again, how is this different from a typical housing summit? I think there's a good benefit to certain housing summits because they show what's going on in the community. You now know what's happening. Whether it's homelessness, whether it's affordable housing not being available, that. But this again took that extra step, did the tours, did the upfront work. It was a 6 or 7 month process before the actual summit happened. And the reason for that was we wanted to make sure that we had the right data that we were sharing with developers, but we also had a developers forum that was the month before the actual summit at the NBC
and the C-suite.
The C-suite summits, our session. So, they're basically the consultants went out and grabbed either your HR directors from all these large companies, your CEOs from the hospital or the manufacturing companies, and brought them together and said, what do you need? What are your needs? How can you, this goes back to retaining and attracting talent, for instance. So, and then the developers meeting basically had, I think, 6 developers or 7 developers, and was moderated by Sue Schwartz, who's the planning director in Greensboro. So she volunteered to moderate a session of developers for Surrey County, which was nice of her to do. And basically was again to get their feedback on what they need, what Chris was talking about. What do you need? Water, sewer. You're in a rural area. Do you have water, sewer availability? Is the county or the city, whoever's handling the planning approvals, going to work with you or not? Because not all of them have been, quite frankly, as they see there's a need for housing, but they don't want certain type of housing. They think that should all be $500,000 or more. But that's just the way some places are going to be. So, do we have any questions about like how we came about this process or what? Oh yeah, sure, Chris.
Before we took questions, I'd like to add on to what Michael was talking about there. What made Surrey County's Housing Summit different than others that we've been approached to and attended? Most housing summits that you go to is very data driven. Here's what we got, here's what we need, here's the shortage, here's the income. It's good information to have, but it's pretty cookie cutter, but it's kind of hard to sexy up how we done it sometimes, right? How do you entice developers? One thing that Surrey County folks did, I think they did an excellent job, and that's why we're here today, is when they invited us in and we showed up, it was at a nice facility, a nice venue for one, so it was interesting. They brought in CEOs, they brought in employers who talked about their need. I brought in the economic development side, which talked about the demand and what's coming. Then they also mixed in the actual housing development data. And those together is what helps instill confidence in us that we're talking with a community that knows what they're talking about. They're prepared, motivated, and they're willing to work with us. So that when we come up with ideas that we can talk about outside the normal toolbox I just mentioned a few minutes earlier, they're approachable about that. So the other part was the tours afterwards. We actually got in shuttle buses and went to the sites and got to see them. Now we're limited. We kind of had to pick a community, so we had to pick one out. And we went around and looked at sites. The local leaders and elected officials and staff members for that community toured us and told us about them. Very knowledgeable. So you were actually speaking with people that knew exactly what you need to know about that site. So from that, we are now actively looking at several sites throughout all the communities in Surrey County, and I think that we're going to be doing some activity there where we're going to be bringing in some high number of units for what they need. May not be high for Charlotte or Raleigh or Wake or Winston-Salem or Greensboro High Point, but it's going to be a good number of new units if everything works out. Hopefully it does. That these people desperately need for their community, and it's going to be a fit for what they're looking for also. Like Michael mentioned, sometimes you visit with communities, they want something, but they need something else. So you got a little bit of pushback there sometimes with council commissioners, what we want for this piece of property versus what we need for this piece of property. Planning probably has to go back and forth with them. We're going through that now with a few sites, what they want there versus what they need there. So we'll work through that and it'll get worked out. But that's the things that set Surrey different. They just went above and beyond, planned a little better, made it more inviting, and kept it very engaging.
Thank you, Chris. So where we are now, does anybody have any questions about the process or the impact that this has had since June, or how we were able to bring in the different developers? And one of the things that I should make a point of, 10, 15, 20 years ago, almost every rural county had a couple of builders that had their pickup truck and their bills are on their dashboard, and they'd go build a couple houses a year. Okay. That doesn't happen very much anymore in a lot of our counties. The people that are doing that are retired, and a lot of people, younger people, haven't taken over that. So that's contributed to that lack of supply in a lot of rural areas. And it's as simple as that. And the mobile homes are getting older. And so you have this growing demand. But are there any questions to Chris or Chris? Yes.
I'd just like to know how the tour sites were identified by the county.
The county, we didn't identify them, the four towns did. So the four town managers and their staff went out and identified those sites. We chose to stick with sites that would have the necessary utilities. I mean, we do have some water and sewer out in the county, but quite honestly, out in the rural areas, it's mostly custom built homes. We've had a lot of that. But most of it's, $500,000 or higher around actual, pilot mountain itself in the Mount Airy area and Elk. So we basically wanted to focus on the four towns during this summit, and that's how those sites were chosen.
Thank you, Chris.
I have
Yes.
a question about the price range of some of these homes, given, I think on that board is like maybe 51,000, give or take, of the average income. So what would you say would be somewhat the price range of these homes for those individuals that are making that type of income? Because those prices have to be a little bit lower for somebody.
Right, it's a great question. There's a lot of things that go into the price. We're always going to give that disclaimer there based upon how much infrastructure we need, how much land cost us, our cost of capital to produce at that time. But for the area, if you're looking at just the income, what they need, they're probably looking somewhere in the 225, 230 and to the 350 range for single family dwelling detached, maybe 200 to that range. 225 has been discussed a lot with all four communities as being a tolerable price range to start at, I guess you should say. And it depends on the size of the house they want too. So if they want to start at 1,200 or 15 or 1,800, then we'll make that determination for each one. Rents in the area is a little bit more easy to define for us, except for that, as you saw on that one slide, most of the rental properties are 40 plus years old. So the rents aren't, they're based upon a 40-year-old establishment. Most of the rents that we'll be looking at will probably be starting around the 11 to 13 and going up to about 17. And then we'll have some affordable units in there that will probably be the 900 plus. So we'll do a mix of those in there. Now those are not going to be, we're not seeking light tech on these projects. So we're not doing full 100% affordable on the majority, because what we're getting from them is we need a mixed income product right now. We need some affordable, but we also need that missing middle, that middle attainable workforce housing that we just don't have. Our nurses, our police, our fire. We could tell you, Chris and Michael both know, there's city staff members who don't live in the areas where they work because they can't find a house they can afford. So we're looking at trying to provide things, house price points for them. So it'll be a varied price point, but that's probably the starting range. Trying to start around, the 200 range is kind of gone. We've done a few pilot programs with that, but they were highly subsidized or free land, free infrastructure, the full gamut. But we can't continue to be at that price point.
It's off of that. Is the city or county going to offer any type of down payment assistance to those first time home buyers, as far as like even your county emergency staff, policemen, teachers, nurses, things like that, or you all want to offer some type of down payment assistance to help me to make it affordable? But I think it's like that 50,000. But for the state, it's below that.
That's a good question. The Surrey Housing Consortium is a home program that Surrey, Stokes, Acton, and Davie, and Surrey County is the grantee. We have not done down payment assistance in quite a while. We've mostly focused on tax credit projects, large, because we've told no rental properties. So that's what we were focusing on, tax credits. If a developer came to us and the numbers made sense, for the total price, for the income eligibility of the home buyer, we could go and put in down payment assistance into that program. So, and the NCHFA has a couple of mortgage programs that provide that as well.
Looking at your average income now, I know I work in Surrey County, so with that being said, as a HUD council, that's higher than what the DPA is for like the community partners program. So if you have somebody 150,000, they're not going to be able to qualify under the state program.
I do think, like with Chris's company, if there's a way to talk about how some subsidy could work, then we could probably make that work. I think one of the things I try to do is create relationships with developers. So if somebody tells us some information like that makes sense, that we can understand, then we can maybe make that work out going forward.
Well, we're also doing some affordable housing projects in Hickory and Statesville for single family detached for sale that do qualify for the down payment assistance. The homes that we would potentially be building in Surrey, the price point that some of them could potentially be at would still qualify them. It wouldn't go over the max allowed for a new house for down payment assistance or the community loan pool program or the home advantage program. So if they still have the proper income, they've got the right credit score and the job the right amount, then they can still qualify for those down payment assistance on these houses, even if they're not dedicated for affordable housing or designated. Now the deed restrictions would not most likely be on these, except for maybe a handful that we designate as deed restricted, income restricted housing that we would use for the consortium money. So it would be one of those that they would most likely go for. So as long as they still qualify on the other side, and it's one of those homes that do have the income restrictions, then they can still qualify for that program. And we do build at multiple price points to try to hit those to meet the county's and the city's requirement.
So one of my concerns was the income is, and then being over income. The other concern was like the price points, because in that area it's not going to be as high. For Winston-Salem per se, the new construction is $270,000. That's the highest that can go.
Right.
Third County, on the other hand, is not that high. So we're looking at maybe 250 for Third County.
On some of the smaller homes, that if we build the smaller home out there, the 12 to 1300, and for the ones that we consider on the affordable, the allocation we make for those, then we can likely get those to that price point that's underneath the max allowed. So there should still be availability there for them. It's just that if we do 50 single family detached, not all 50 are going to be affordable and deed restricted. And that was one of the things Michael alluded to, is some of the pushback we've been getting is we don't want all deed restricted, income restricted housing. We have some of that now. We need that missing middle, that attainable also, to where someone isn't restricted in their income that can buy this house. Just the reverse of what you're saying is they don't have an opportunity to buy a house because a lot of it might be deed or income restricted. Now we're able to do that because what we really haven't mentioned here is we are Jarian Development and Offsite Tech is a company under one umbrella, but two separate things. We're horizontal developers, we're vertical builders as Jarian Development. Offsite Tech, we're manufacturers of steel framing for housing. We do a panelized system. We bring it out, we erect it on site, it goes faster, it goes quicker. It's more affordable that way. It takes less people to do it. A lot of technological advances to it that meets a lot of the energy saving requirements too. So it gets us to those points quicker. So we're able to save cost because we're a direct manufacturer. A lot of our supplies that go into the houses do not come from distributors. It comes direct from the manufacturers. So we can afford to go in and do some houses in these developments that meet the affordable housing price points and not suffer as a company as a whole. So we can kind of take those, we hate to call them lost leaders, but the houses that you make less on because, you're not making it less on everything. Now, if we get into a site or a situation where we get land for free and infrastructure's there and somebody goes all in with this, we take all that and that goes toward a lower price point. That doesn't just pad our pockets. All that goes into a better price for the homeowner.
I just wanted to mention, if you've been to Surrey County, you may know that we have a lot of metal building manufacturers. I think we have 15 companies that make metal carports, metal buildings. One of those, Carport Central, has developed a housing product from those materials. It's engineered. And one thing they were having trouble with was finance. Lenders weren't sure how to loan money for this new product. And one thing Andy Scott did for us, because of his connections, he was able to connect them with Fannie Mae. And they are working with them to develop a product, a financing product that will go along with this concept that they've developed. And we also have another developer that's looking at a tract of land outside of Mount Airy for cross mods. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a cross mod, but apparently it's a home that's built like a manufactured home, like a double wide or a single wide, but it actually looks like a small bungalow with a garage. I believe the closest manufacturer, at least supplier here, will be Clayton that's in that game. I haven't seen these, but I know Andy's kind of high on them on the project that he has seen in Maryland. And so there are some products out there, much like the one he described, that he's innovated, that are much more cost effective. They're just not as well known. But I know that the one company in Mount Airy, they've done a few of these in the region. They're very well built. Andy was very excited about it when he toured their facility. I know our building inspectors are very high on them. So I feel like there are some opportunities out there for the rural counties and some affordable housing where the actual housing itself, the construction is very affordable.
Thank you, Chris.
And that's something we can add on to that too. That's one thing that also we thought was great about Surrey is all the steel labor up there that we could potentially tap into in the local market to help make these communities happen. When it comes to financing steel, we could probably even work with that company to help them out as well. It's mainly the inspections that throw people off. Local inspectors don't know how to inspect steel. That's why we use engineer stamp plans. When the products that we're doing in Charlotte right now, Lincolnton, Hickory, Statesville, Conover, all over the place. Basically, the inspectors there, as long as we have our engineer stamp plans, that's what they go off of. They just use those. Everything else about the house is fairly same as normal. So when you get to the house and it's finished, it looks just like a traditional built house, except if you took the skin off, you'd find all the metal. The cross mod that Chris talked about is something that we're not doing exactly cross mod or call it that, but we do fully manufacture tiny homes and ADUs in our factory as well. You can take those. We do have a product where we can take those and put those together, kind of like a module. It basically is modular then. And it's kind of like a cross mod would be, where you can take a smaller building, transport it out, put two together, and you have a bigger building. That is another way that industry is going, as well as when we're doing multifamily and hotel stuff, pods, fully built pods that you can take a bathroom that's ADA compliant, put it right in place, and not have construction on site. So developers like ourselves, builders like what Chris is talking about there, and we know that builder, that developer, we've talked to them about doing metal stuff with them before. So competition is good. We collaborate with all these guys. We can't do it all ourselves. Some of these guys are much bigger than we are, so we collaborate with them. It gets the product out there. It gets the innovation going. They're tapping into that, looking at that as well as ways to just build these houses faster, more cost efficient, so we can hit the price points.
Thank you, Chris. I think we only have about another question.
Just a quick question, and maybe a hard one to answer for other Chris Younger. Just to talk about the manufactured offsite tech and the cross mod. I'm trying to catch up on all the terminology. Is there a certain number of units that you need to be building together to hit those price points that you've been sort of referencing generally? I know it may be different for each of those, but I'm wondering, got two lots, come to you and do some of those technologies work, or are they going to be more expensive because I'm only working with two lots versus maybe
more expensive?
25 lot development.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. When we first started out, we were doing pilot programs with communities that would do 3 lots, 6, 10. But the cost effectiveness, the way we produce and manufacture, isn't there fully when we do that. So really, for us to be more cost effective, the 30, 50 units is great to hit, because as we manufacture these, we call printing them out. Well, it's not 3D printing, but as we make these and we panelize and we ship them out as units, the more we can send out and then send our crews out and bring a crane in. A crane can cost you $7,000, $15,000, $30,000, depending on how long you have it, how big it is. Crane everything in place. To be cost effective, we need to have them there for a while. For the development, cost effective, we need more site that we can develop. Doing the infill is a great way to get the site out there and kind of people introduced to it, but it's not the most cost effective for us. Maybe the smaller stick build traditional guys would probably be the better bet for that. We'd love to. Now we could sell them packets. We could sell them units, kits, and they could do them themselves. We'd love to partner with builders that want to go out and do infill. But using our own crews to go out and do 1, 2, or 3 typically does not work too well.
Thank you for that question. I think we only have a couple minutes left. 3 minutes left. Any last questions? Going once, going twice. We're done. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to our panelist and facilitator for the Surrey County Housing Summit. Are we feeling okay to power through, or do we need a break? Power through. I hear power through. If you need to use the restroom, feel free to go there, but we'll go ahead and move on to the next session. All right. Our last session is a local developer housing industry forum. We have Ben Brocksmith, Executive Director of Piedmont Triad Apartment Association, who will be facilitating this session. Bryce Shearburn, Principal with Infill Delegate LLC. Jeremy Simpson, CEO of the Housing Tree, CDO. And Chris Younger, who was just at the last session, Business and Government Strategist with JRN Development and Offsite Tech. And we're going to hear directly from the developer and building industry.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I know the cake, the mac and cheese, the chicken, it was a lot. It was delicious. I see heads nodding, not all nodding out. That's good. For the last session, how about a quick round of applause for the Piedmont Triad Regional Council? It's been a very insightful event, I know, for me and for a lot of folks here. So we'll get to it. I'm going to do a very brief introduction so you know who's up here. You've met Chris Younger. He's a business and government strategist and former economic developer and an expert in government relations, strategic partnerships, incentives, and funding resources, and a lot of other areas, as we learned in the last panel. We have Jeremy Simpson. Jeremy is dedicated and forward-thinking executive director of the Housing Tree, a community development nonprofit organization. With a passion for addressing housing disparities and empowering communities, Jeremy has been instrumental in the organization's mission to provide affordable housing and economic development opportunities. And then we have Bryce Shearburn, principal at Infill Delegate LLC, doing nonprofit facility and affordable housing development, primarily West Salem, Washington Park, Northeast Ward of Winston-Salem, who now enjoys a short walk to home after 20 years of weekly airplane commutes, and focuses on thoughtful, intentional, smaller projects that provide affordable quality housing, navigating the capital stack challenges with much collaboration. So with that, let's start off with, I think, a pretty easy one. Is this the same development environment from 4 or 5 years ago? If yes or no, what housing preferences or requirement shifts have you encountered that are influencing your projects today?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you guys for having me. The environment today is different for a few reasons. One, it's more focused on sustainability, which is most important. Aging in place design, we don't think about that. The nursing homes are, a great thing, but I think we're evolving to people want to age in place. So with aging in place, the design models are different, as well as community-centered design. The community's input now is more important than ever because of we're talking about challenges, hurdles, things to get across to get developments done. Everybody knows without the community, we have nothing. So if the community's not on board, them being a part at the beginning planning phases helps expedite solving the problem of housing. And again, those things are a few that make the difference.
Good day, and I'm happy to be here with all this energy. I would say certainly that it is significantly different than it was 4 or 5 years ago, both on the good side and the bad side. for our community in Winston-Salem, over the last 3 years particularly, we've undertaken a very aggressive examination of affordable housing and community needs. So that has raised the community awareness. And a lot of that is just educational. As has been mentioned before in other places, folks get confused about what affordable housing is and nomenclature. And we've got choice, and we've got AMIs, and we've got wraparound services, and we have this whole nomenclature which tends to confuse folks. And I think in Winston, the general perception was all affordable housing was public housing. And until you are able to differentiate and to get folks thinking about the missing middle, which is the policeman, teacher, nurse, the dental assistant, the retail folks, you're not going to have the kind of collaboration that's needed. And I think Winston's been going through this process and making some strides. Clearly, the economic conditions are significantly different. I mean, we enjoyed a low interest rate environment for 7 to 8 years. Everybody was fat, dumb, and happy. Underwriting was easy peasy. Folks didn't really have lenders did not have did not present many burdens. And that, of course, is day and night. See, as we all have seen, this has created a lot of headwinds, and it also affects costs. We see this reflected in pricing and in rents throughout the community. So they be rural, they be urban. So these differences are percolating through the system, and we're just trying to struggle along and find answers so we can keep things going forward in an orderly way.
I'll let that be a two-person answer there, so we can move on. We could talk about that a lot, but that's 4 or 5 years ago, and we of course want to talk about move on to the present and the future. So I'll skip an answer on that.
Actually, let's get it back to you. You talk about the present and the future. The present is, I think, a little bit easier for people to understand. We know what the environment is today, but 2-3 years from now, we don't. So, and we are jumping a little bit ahead here, and we'll bring it back. But what trends are you seeing in housing construction and design over the next decade, and how are you preparing for them with the knowledge of what's today is not tomorrow, and what's tomorrow is not the day after?
Yeah, you can definitely talk to them. So for us, it's steel framing, it's offsite construction, panelization, new materials. Now that does not mean that wood framing goes away. It does not mean stick building goes away. It means that we are a new technology to be introduced to this, a new way to do housing, just the way telecommunications have expanded, the way we build cars, computers, everything's changed. Construction industry has still been doing about the same thing for the last 130 years. I'm a former builder outside of state also before I came here, and now working with this organization. But some of the changes that we look at now is ways that we can be more technologically advanced in our materials, our application, how we construct, the use of our manpower, which is limited, and speed to market so that we can get these houses on the market faster, especially in a volatile interest rate where you don't know if they're going up or down. Hopefully they're going down January. So we look at that. We also look at more energy efficient ways, how we can use different type sheeting on that exterior of the house to minimize thermal bridging, closed cell insulation that helps with the structural as well as insulation of the house, using a 4-in-1 type exterior structural sheeting board that keeps the dew point outside your wall instead of inside your wall. And why that's significant, most people don't really think about that. But those who live maybe in the high humidity areas, whether it be in the mountains or it be on the coast, you can never, how many of you gone to the beach, you go into your rental, you get in there, it's got the smell, right? You can never get rid of it. That's the dew point causing that. So this is just one benefit, no more smell. So some of the things that we look at is how can we design to be faster, more cost effective, better use of manpower, integrate that in with our robotics and our automation, and just basically create a more updated house, just like we do with cars now, and everything else. We just need to bring the housing industry up to it. Now, it doesn't mean a full replacement, but it's the step. And if we don't take the step, we're just going to stay.
So along those lines, you're talking about new and different ways to do things. We're hearing a lot about missing middle, infill, a lot of redevelopment. And we're hearing education a lot today. Education. So in terms of education, how do builders, developers, local jurisdictions, community stakeholders, how does everybody come together to navigate this permitting, the zoning, these new kinds of design standards, while still keeping focus on the things that really contribute to their community when we're talking about this kind of housing?
So that's where actually the housing tree came from. The housing tree is a community development organization, and it's for advocacy and to be able to make these changes. I'm also a for-profit builder and some other things, but to spend the time working with municipalities and the community engagement and finding out the needs of the community, being able to make the changes with the zoning, because there's some changes that have to be made when it comes to parking requirements. Parking requirements allow you to have more space to be able to build, especially with infill development. We have to go vertical. With going vertical, minimizing the parking requirements, that allows to get more units on the ground. Softening the idea of density is a big thing. Density is not always bad, especially when you have people sleeping on the floor and on the streets. So we have to get more units on the ground. Those changes make a big difference to advocate for those changes, because it starts upstream. It starts with policy. So that community development work is an extreme need. So builders can do what they need to do to stay sustainable. Developers can do what they need to do to get stuff on the ground. But spending time away from that, it's hard to do both, especially on a smaller scale.
Well, in terms of, the landscape and the opportunities in Winston-Salem, I think that, we've addressed some of the top fives. I mean, everybody talks about zoning, density, infrastructure, collaboration, public-private partnerships. There's nothing like a pandemic to focus the mind. And what happened in Winston-Salem was that we had the wonderful confluence of an emerging crisis of affordable housing, which has been on the discussion table in Winston for a decade. And the availability of transformational dollars really got people excited about trying to do it. Now, having said that, we're still feeling our way in terms of how to do it. But it's been mentioned up here, there are all kinds of technologies, certainly modular and offsite and panelized construction and these sorts of techniques. But also we need to be able to have those kind of outcomes in smaller projects. And there's a number of different ways that you can do that. I mean, you can do that by cities such as Winston-Salem that's undertaken a survey of available lots that have sidewalks and curb and gutter and water meters and infrastructure and are possibly tax delinquent. There's a number of opportunities to allocate resources, not necessarily dollar resources, but just thinking resources to try to work around some of these things. And I think there are other folks in the market. True Homes, for instance, is kind of takes the Walmart. Walmart has sucked all of the air out of their supply chain and their pricing structures. And True Homes, if you're a volume builder, which they are, but they do 2,000 units a year and they have it down to an exact science, the same way Walmart does. When Walmart carpet bombed the country with stores, they went to suppliers and said, on the construction side, this is our expectation. And they would fight over nickels. Well, if you fight over nickels and you've got 1,000 projects and those nickels add up, and I think those kinds of focused attention to smaller things can be very helpful.
So continuing off of that, and focusing on this today, what are some of the top 3-4 issues, holdups that delay or impact development are there steps that everyone here can be taking or going back to help, overcome these things? Obviously, with safety appropriately, we're not just throwing everything to the wind here, but what steps are missing? What are the things that are holding up development right now?
Finance. The public-private partnerships are more important now than ever because the cost of money, the cost of time, the cost of resources to be able to get things done, to get, we use in our world, to get deals to pencil. When interest rates are extremely high, cost of materials are high, labor is short, naturally the cost of everything goes through the roof. So subsidizing development to make it attainable. We talk about affordability. Affordability is a moving target, but to provide attainable housing for people's specific situation. The public sector, and this is a statement that I use, and it may sound terrible, but it's need to be said. We have to stop making public issues a private sector problem. Affordable housing is a public problem. So the private sector must stay sustainable to keep doing what they do to solve the problem. But if they go out of business, jobs are lost. Food is not on the table. People lose. So public sector we all have to work together to find as many dollars as we can to solve the problem. Now, execution of these dollars is a whole nother subject, but I can go on about that.
Yeah, I'll say something. Thank you, Jeremy. And I want to add on to that, public-private partnerships, true partnerships. So as developers, when we go to municipalities where they approach us and they say, what can we do to make this project happen? We talk about, okay, let's say you have a certain price point you got to hit. As a developer, if it pencils out, we'll do it. If it doesn't, we don't want to do it. Now, if we do it and it looks like it's not going to pencil out, we then go to the municipality and say, here's what we need from you. This is going to be a true partnership. Here's your contribution to it to make this work. If you can do this, we can make it work on our side and we can make this happen. It's getting true cooperation to do that and not, maybe thinking outside the box, talking about excess municipal land, infrastructure extensions, improvements, whether it be tax abatements, whatever it might be. We've got to be able to work together as a true partnership to make these houses work. Private sector can't cure it ourselves. There's just too much cost right now. So when we go into cost of capital, that's very expensive for us right now. If we can come in and work with you to make this happen, and we're not coming in just to increase the profits. We'll show you what it takes to make it happen. So if we have true partnerships and then remove some of the barriers, we've talked to some communities that, we've got funding available, but we got these 15 hoops and they get smaller every time you jump through one. And it's very tough, it's very time consuming, it's very expensive. We are working on a project right now in Winston-Salem, multifamily, HUD project, and it's costing us about $600,000 just to get the HUD program, just to get the HUD project for the interest rate that we need to make it pencil. So now we know that involves a lot of people. A lot of people got their hands in the cookie jar for that. All that goes into the cost of the project. We're talking trying to make something affordable. We got to spend $600,000 to $1 million just to try to make it affordable. It's counterproductive. So if we can sort of ease off some of the restrictions, think logically instead of thinking how we've always done it the whole past 10, 15 years. One of the things that's very dangerous to think about in business is we've always done it this way. That'll kill you. So we've got to be able to be willing to make the change. And it does start at higher levels than much of what's in this room probably. But it starts with us and then take it up to the top and get true collaboration going.
Before you give it back, in terms of the collaboration, what are like top 2 or 3 I don't want to say bad areas, but what are the top 2 or 3 things when it comes to that partnership where maybe people don't expect to see the collaboration or think they need to have the collaboration?
I would say probably when it comes to land acquisition, one of those. Go find land, bring it to us, we'll see what we can do. Well, development costs start with the land. When we have, it can be harsh to hear. And if we were in a public forum right now at a public meeting of your town, your city, you might hear people saying, well, cost of housing is going up so high. Why don't you guys do something about this and that? And I was going to point at you. Sorry. Let's say you're saying that, and you're right there agreeing, but I just bought 100 acres of land from you at $60,000 an acre. You got yours and you're leaving. It starts with the landowner. So helping find land and landowners who are cooperative to do actual housing, that's where it starts. And then helping out with some of the things Jeremy talked about. Ease up on like parking, density, ways to be able to get your hands on funds to be able to make this work. Some of the restrictions that get put on us when it comes to who you have to use, how you have to use, what materials, that can be restrictive for us as well. And so it can back developers off of that. So unless you're a large developer doing it national, affordable housing isn't that attractive to you. It's tough to do. It doesn't pencil out. It takes more time, you make less money. It's counterproductive. So if we get public in with us as private, and we kind of even that out, we take some of the burden on ourselves, everyone contributes, then it becomes like Jeremy mentioned, it's not a private sector solution, it's a public-private solution.
Bryce, is that consistent with smaller investments and smaller projects as well?
Well, I think it's consistent across the board, and the issue of collaboration and public-private partnerships can be seen in duplex projects, and it could be seen in the housing authority's choice neighborhood projects. I mean, I think that what Winston-Salem has done is they've done a couple of things that have been very helpful. You know, they adopted an accessory dwelling unit ordinance, and in that ordinance, which was bitterly contested in our community for, in my view, the wrong reasons, you know, they did adopt modern standards where they did not require increased parking. You know, they did not require some of the gotchas in those deals. And more importantly, they leveled the playing field in terms of application and process. Other communities that I have seen and worked within have ombudsmen, you know, affordable housing one-stop shop, which I think is a very helpful tool because it can coordinate and organize what's available. It can start connecting the dots for people, and it makes things easy that you don't have to come in and hunt and peck around in a community wherever it is to find out who's doing what. You know, the local utilization of the ARPA monies in Winston-Salem, which was $30 million allocated to affordable housing, is I think 95% committed with a unit output yet to be seen of something on the order of 800 units against a 14,000 unit need in Forsyth County. So you see that while the impression is, gee whiz, we're really solving this problem, there are so many more things to do. And along those lines, in terms of planning and zoning, I think Winston does a terrific job of managing that. There are folks in communities that have, for instance, affordable missing middle approved plans. So you do not have to go through the design approval permit process. You know, there are other communities that are engaged in significant infrastructure development. Winston-Salem is beginning to do that. They are approaching it kind of from the other end where they're now buying land and making it available for $1 or less in the context of tax value add developments. And I think that stuff makes sense. I think that we have not had in North Carolina familiarity with one of the most important tools, or we have not used it in the housing space, which is increment financing. You know, in the economic development space in North Carolina, you know, the math is simple. A business comes into the community and says, we're going to do this on this piece of dirt, and it's got a tax value now of X, and it's going to be 100X when we're done, or 10X, or pick your multiplier. The community say, okay, we will pledge to that project the cash equivalent of 7 years of that incremental tax income. Well, they do not allow that for affordable housing projects, which to me is, you know, cutting off your nose to spite your face. You cannot encourage economic development and job formation if you have no place for those employees and employers to safely house their people. I think the other leg of the stool of this public-private partnership is institutional foundation and philanthropic foundations. You know, many communities in North Carolina, Winston-Salem is not yet one, but they have structures as community land trust and other sorts of philanthropic investment bank that can augment sometimes what the limited community development dollars are for revolving funds. It's a matter of taking a look at the community and picking those things that folks can get excited about and get behind it. And there are 10 things you can do. If you do 3 or 4 of them, you're likely to be have some success.
So I want to use you said there's 14,000, needed 14,000 units just in Forsyth County in the foreseeable future. And I know that
For affordable.
So that's not even taken into account conventionals.
But affordable also, again, to the nomenclature issue, affordable is the gamut from public housing 30% AMI to 150% AMI, which in Winston-Salem is $150,000 per household. And what we have done, because the economics promote it, is we have seen in our community 4,000 units of Texas donut housing be developed to meet the need of the innovative employers that are creating jobs. But that does not address the largest tranche of need, which is 80% AMI.
So I want to use that because that affordable segment is an area that I think a lot of us have seen a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding as to what that goes. And a lot of that goes to, you know, the men and women that are working a lot of the jobs that really everybody depends on. And that includes the construction industry. What impact do labor shortages on the construction industry have on the timelines, on the development of this type of housing? And have any of you had any experience or heard of anything to help address the labor shortage issue in that area that I think goes without saying then has a broader benefit in the areas that it's taking place?
Right. Labor shortages, and I'm sure all of us up here can say, have been a challenge. Time to get things done raises the cost, and these things are a major issue. So when it talks about solutions for this, the solutions, and this is going to sound terrible again, is we got to get people to go back to work. At the end of the day, whatever that takes, because when we're not working, we can't do. And when we can't do, prices go up. So workforce solutions and workforce development is a needed thing yesterday. We have to solve housing problems today. So we have to just collaborate and find any connection, whether it's through schools or workforce program that can fund people to just show up. But the challenge is that we can have all the programs that we want. People will not show up. I own a staffing agency as well. We employ thousands of people. We can offer employment, and getting people to come to work has blown my mind, because whether you pay them $100 an hour or 10, this is a problem that I think is higher upstream than what we're talking about, because I don't know what happened. I understand dollars were given for subsidy and for people to survive, but I was under the impression that the dollars had dried up. People are still not going to work. So maybe we need to have a summit on what they know that we don't, because whatever is taking place is that causing more challenges even outside of development.
Take a short addition to that, Jeremy, you're totally right. I'm glad you said it, because if you didn't, I probably would. We need to get people to go back to work. We don't know how are people that are not working surviving. Those who used to work at our manufacturing plant or construction sites who don't want to come back. And one, because working conditions, something happened during COVID where people either got satisfied with just being content with what they got or less, finding money somewhere else, side gig. It's amazing to know there's less people, even though they show unemployment to be down. Being a former economic developer, I know a lot of manufacturing owners, a lot of business owners, they all say just the reverse. Can't find people. We as manufacturers, employers, hard to find people. Don't know why they're not coming back. Don't know what's going on with them. But what we have done as part of a solution is we have started collaborating with other builders as well, developers, to co-use some of the same people. When it comes to mechanical, electrical, plumbing, we're going to go out. We're going to get these firms together, these big ones together. We're going to tie them up. We're going to use them. We're going to share resources. We're also going to use less subcontractors. Now, we love to use local people in our developments because it puts local jobs in, and it's easier for logistics. But we're finding it hard. Concrete guys will show up Monday, they show up Monday, not Tuesday, not Wednesday. I'll go to another guy. Then show up, you're your third guy. Hey, 2 weeks behind. So we're going to start, we're bringing more on direct, our own direct employees, our own direct contractors that work for us on our jobs, keep them busy all the time. They've always got money coming in, and they don't get lured away by another builder trying to take away that subcontractor. So I think you'll find more builders and developers hiring people on directly and doing some co-sharing of employees.
So labor is one big cost of that. Are there other key factors influencing the cost of housing construction specific to the Triad region, and what can be done or what is being done to mitigate those costs?
Say something easy on that. Cost of capital. So we mentioned it earlier. I raised my hand earlier on one of the segments. Housing prices have gone up 80% since 2018. Interest rates right now, the same house at 3.75% back in 2020 or before, at 8.25% now, for the same house costs you 87.5% more for the mortgage payment than it did then. So you got increased cost, you got increased interest from your mortgage, and then also when that was contributing to that is the increased cost of capital, our interest rate to build a project. We used to come in and be able to be 3-4% or 8%, put down 5-10% equity on cash up front. Now many lenders want 30-40%. We're talking $25 million deals. That's a lot of money. We're trying to do, we got 120 million in progress right now. That's a lot of cash out. So cost of capital is a big driving factor for us, even more. And what that does, it puts pressure on us to find more affordable land. That's the whole infrastructure. We needed public-private partnerships, because what we could used to absorb or pay more for land, we can't anymore. Because think about if your mortgage went up 87% and it's a $300,000 house and it went up $2,200. Now it went from $1,600 to $2,800. Think about $25 million and how much more we're paying in interest now.
During construction.
Just during construction.
Yeah, not even selling.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, during construction, when there's not even revenue coming in, we have to eat that cost the complete time of the project when people don't show up to work. So a lot of people don't think about that. Those costs are absorbed because we have to put a lot more money up front, then absorb the interest rate hike during construction, all before we put any food on our table at all.
So along those lines, Chris, you're talking about it has to go further out to get the cheaper land. Is there an understanding of the additional infrastructure costs that are necessary that are not borne by developers when you're talking with municipalities, governments, others about those types of projects?
Yeah, without going in dollar specific, but in general, if we're looking at land that doesn't have water or sewer there, that's one of the first things we're going to ask for is water or sewer extension. It's going to increase the revenue for the municipality because you're going to extend that to the project. If there's pump station needed, then we may ask for that as well. You know, if we got topography challenges. So those are typically some of the things that are not always thought of when it comes to. Those are some of the things that we think of besides land. Next thing on our list is water and sewer extensions. Does that answer what you're asking me?
Yeah, just there's so much infrastructure people don't think about. It's out of sight, out of mind. I turn my faucet on, it comes out, it goes down the drain, it's taken care of. But that's very capital intensive and has its own hidden costs. I want to make sure we have some time for questions. So I only have probably 2 or 3 more questions here. I did want to cover what strategies are all of you employing to make housing more inclusive and accessible for people with disabilities and diverse needs?
We're doing a lot of main level living development. It's definitely cheaper to go up, go vertical, but main level living is very important to us because it accommodates the masses. Whether you're elderly, whether you're disabled, whether you have kids that you need to keep an eye on, it offers more variety to the community. That's very important to us. And another thing is working with the topography to accommodate for less stairs to entry. It costs a little more for main level living, it costs a little more to get the topography what it needs to be, but the outcome solves a problem that we see is missing because obviously, you know, most developers are going to go vertical to save costs.
Well, I think that, you know, current development trends, as Chris has alluded to, folks are looking around for solutions, whether it be modular. You know, 20 years ago when leads was all the rage, and I was deep into the general services federal real estate space, and federal government said everything's got to be lead. Everybody freaked out. And the first deals cost us 15% more. And then, as it has happened with solar and with vehicles and with these other technological initiatives and changes, well, sustainable design is no more expensive than regular construction. And the same with thermal envelope and efficiency. Accessibility and unit size are things I think that have come into play. We've seen unit sizes shrink dramatically. And we've also seen from the point of view of a developer, you know, doing any kind of project, really, accessibility is a thing that has to be addressed. And it's not, no longer is just an ADA issue. I mean, it's a livability issue for folks that have challenges or folks that are going to be challenged in the future. You know, we set up these programs to provide affordable housing for a term of 15 or 30 years, and we have to make sure that those units for folks that are going to be there are going to be appropriate for their aging. You know, there's lots of little things, it's been alluded to, you know, things you just don't think about, you know, that go into this. I think the 100-point chart of how to do a subdivision is interesting because it really gets into the deep dive of how many critical path elements there are and how many ways and things that you have to address and deal with.
Yeah, and this chart is I didn't do a whole lot with that as part of the initial design of it. That doesn't cover multifamily, or that's just single family, and it's only for our region. It can be much longer in other parts of the state. I see one question coming in, and I encourage folks to ask. I have one last 2-parter question before we open it up. Nod your head, yes or no. Do you think other industries or the general public understand today's development challenges? My final question before we open it up to each of you is, what is the one thing that people should leave here with, knowing about the development challenges? Your one big thing that people can walk away and share. This is something that, you know, is really impacting the ability to develop affordable housing in our area.
I'll start and then we'll go down the line, right? Okay. For us as private developers and manufacturers, the one thing to take away and know is we are here and willing to work with municipalities. We are willing to work to get you the price point, the product that you need, but we need a cooperation. We need partnership. Through partnership, it can't be, well, here's what we got available to you. You can check it out and see what works out. As we've seen, those funding mechanisms, unless you are a large national developer with a large dedicated staff going after that, they mostly don't work out. So, and they work out for, if you're doing 100% affordable units, market rate takes care of itself. It's that middle part that we truly have to collaborate on. And developers like myself and others are out there willing to do it if we can be creative and talk back and forth. One of the last little quick things, RFPs. I tell you, RFPs are the standard, right? Developers hate them. With a passion. They are very time consuming. They take a long time. They do not really open up an open dialogue to talk back and forth to solve your problems, to get creative. You pretty much, you get a little bit of time, you put it on paper, you get it back, you get an answer. You spend $30,000 doing it, and maybe there's nothing come out of it. So RFPs will drive us crazy. We know that sometimes they're needed, but if we have a problem that we need to get creative about, we need to sit together and figure it out and find out the solution together. Don't just say fill out this form, give it back, because that's what's going to get you the cookie cutter. And that's not what you need. It's not working.
Well, I think in our community, it's just a question of understanding the impact that a small thing may have. You know, I don't want to keep going back to the same thing, but if you start with land, and the city decides it wants to support efforts, then it buys land and makes it available for free. The next step, which some cities do and some cities don't, is to provide the infrastructure and development capacity stuff that is a benefit to the community. And in Winston, you know, we've had this huge uptick in meter and connection fees by the utility commission, which is separate from city council. They have their own rationale for doing that. Those kind of cost structures that adversely affect affordable housing and can easily be addressed, ought to be addressed, and the whole permitting process, which again is, you know, it's a tweak of staff. It's you know, moving them to the front of the line, and it's these strategies that are utilized by HUD and other providers and movers and shakers in this space. And we just need to constantly remind our folks, I think, that every little bit helps. You know, Dwayne Anderson, who is a very powerful developer and did a lot of stuff throughout the state, always said that it's all about stacking the nickels up. You know, you don't go into a municipality and ask them for $1. You go and ask them for 20 nickels, because they can take a nickel from here and a nickel from there and a nickel from someplace else. And that's what it takes. I mean, small projects, big projects, it doesn't make any difference how many zeros. As long as you've got the willingness and people are willing to think outside the box a little bit, then I think that you can have success and have outcomes that the community needs.
A comment that I would like to give to you all about developers are, we do care about community. We want the best for community, because if the community wins, at the end of the day, we do as well. So a lot of times communities think that we just want to come in, make a bunch of money and go down the road. That's not the case, because if without community, as I stated from the very beginning, we have nothing. So that's what I would like to do.
All right, we've got 2 questions up on the screen. I'm going to start with the one on top and then send it down since Chris is on the end. So we'll start with, how does the housing industry need to change to serve the silver tsunami that is already upon us?
I guess because I'm silver. I'm a member of that demographic, that's for sure. You know, there is a tsunami coming, you know, no doubt. I mean, you read about it, you hear about it. I was very disturbed to learn, however, that men have just lost 6 years of average life expectancy. So, you know, we're looking over our shoulders. I think there's design aspects that need to be addressed. I think that there are opportunities for utilizing strategies that other countries and other civilizations use. I mean, we in America don't take good care of our elderly, and we never have. You know, there are other communities, European, Asian, and others, where family and the way that families approach the decline of the elderly is much, much different. I think that there are co-living opportunities that could be explored more aggressively in the same way that we do supportive housing for disabled and other challenged populations. I think that's something that could easily be done without much change in the way that we think about it. And I think there's been a significant change in the way that we're able to deliver in-home services so people can shelter in place. I think ADUs have the potential to be extraordinarily impactful in that regard. In neighborhoods where I work, the challenge that folks who are old have is their taxes are going up because gentrification is occurring, values are rising, they're being challenged to stay in their house. If they had a chance to get a quality ADU constructed that gives them choices, either for caregivers or for them to have an income stream, or to do what some folks do, which is to move out of the big house into the ADU and have a different income stream. So, you know, there's lots of different things developers and development and community development folks and stakeholders can do. And it certainly is coming. But for me, it's here.
We do small multifamily is what we like to focus on, which are the duplexes, triplexes, quads, to be able to accomplish what we're talking about. Like spoke about earlier, aging in place, being able to have a home where you live on one side and your mother lives next door. You know,
That's close.
yeah, I must say my mother couldn't live with me, so next door probably be out of question anyway. But not because of her, because of me. But that offers the opportunity to be able to keep the quality of life, keep her independence, and help with the offset cost of increased housing or a family member or a friend. So smaller multifamily, some of these zoning changes and things that we're trying to work towards offering for these smaller multifamily can help with the challenge that we're talking about.
You want me to go to the next question?
Unless you want to offend Bryce with more, you know.
Go ahead.
No, no, that's okay. I think that's been said about them. Silver hair
The
community.
old guys,
Yeah. The wise.
I don't know about that. Road hard, put it wet.
Somebody want to know what kind of hair care product I use? It's called Primo. Matte finish, mild hold.
I use the best kind.
Yeah. I'm assuming, did you mean to say HUD? HUD loan? Kind of HUD loan? Nobody wants to raise their hand who wrote that?
Yeah.
What kind of hood?
Okay, so from the Winston-Salem Apartments, I believe it's the 223D4 that we're working on right now for HUD.
It's a good program.
Yeah, it works out. It's a good program. It's going to be good for us. The interest rate, it's just very technologically tedious. It's got a lot more technical review to it than Winston-Salem local HUD does. Some things that are different than local standards, which, you know, we've had to change and think of differently. And then the time and the cost to do it. It's very expensive to do, very timely to do. So as developers, Jeremy knows this very well, and we do an infill. We want to get out and start moving dirt as soon as we can, because like we mentioned, we've got money tied up in this already. We're paying interest on it. We got manpower in it. We need to produce results. We got people who need housing. And here we are going through, you know, a lot of this, the funding paperwork is necessary. The bureaucracy is necessary. Again, I'm a former economic developer. I know government money is slow money. Well, I told my industries all the time when you're coming in, there's things you got to do. There's things you got to prove. You understand it's tax dollars. It's public money. But if we can find ways to streamline that, cut down some of the cost, that'll get passed into the product. You know, it's our profit is our profit. it's going to remain pretty constant. Now we'll make less on some things because we need to, but if we're cutting costs on others, it's a competitive advantage to us. It helps to bring the market back in place where it should be, and it takes pressure off of us, and we can do more work. More work is better living for everybody, longevity. So that's the HUD program that we're using, and it's a great product. It's just taking a while.
There goes. Any other questions for our panelists or facilitator? If not, let's give a big round of applause for our panelists. 221 D4? Okay.
That's
awesome.
It's worth every penny.
All right. Thank you so much. As we're wrapping up this event, we want to do a couple things again. We wanted to design this event not only to have geographic coverage of our entire region, but also have public and private feedback in terms of panelists. And I'm very happy that we had those conversations across the board. So I'm going to pass it off to Jesse. He's going to talk about our Brownfields program, revolving loan fund, as well as the November 30th event. And you'll have that in your packet.
Yeah, real quick. Promise we'll get you out of here in the next minute or two. In your packet, you've got this workshop. So if you want to kind of take a deeper dive into development of kind of old mill sites or dry cleaners or gas stations, kind of a little bit definitely related to today's discussion, we've got a free workshop on November 30th. So we'd love to have some more folks here and learn about the Brownfields program. So there's resources, both finding out what's there as well as from the cleanup side to lower those costs of redeveloping brownfields properties in the region. So we'd love you to come there. We've got folks from EPA, state. We've got some examples to cover from around the region, from urban to rural. So I just wanted to extend that invitation to you. And thank you to everybody for coming today. And Michael's going to close it out. He can be very brief.
I'll be very brief. Thank you, Jesse. I'd just like to thank everybody for coming. And if I could see one thing happen, it would be like the Surrey Housing Consortium or Surrey Housing Summit that we did, where we brought developers in and they're going to build things. And so what I'm hoping out of this is that you talk to somebody, you've met with somebody, you see somebody that said something you like, you contact them and you make something happen, because we all need it. Every community needs this. There's nobody that has oversupply of housing. That's one thing to think. And I wanted to thank all of the presenters and the moderators. Can we give them a quick round of applause? Thank you all. And I also want to thank Jose Colon, who really did most of this. So thank you. And we will be sending out a survey after this to
On your packet.
It's on your, yeah. Look at your packet. All right. So that's about it. I hope everybody has a safe trip home, and I hope you enjoyed this summit. Thank you.